their practice. I'm really excited on this one, Teddles, for a dungeon that is incredibly on the rails. It seems like you're having to pull the same 80-ish% trash, maybe the last, 20, 10%, something like that is going to be a little bit different. I'm very excited to see what 2 weeks of practice with no streaming and no broadcasting of it is going to bring us.
Yeah. So in the games yesterday, Method EU actually did a very risky pull at this first part inside of King's Rest. They actually pull all 4 packs with all of the emissaries and everything else, and they just kind of make sure that they have enough DPS to be able to DPS it down, whereas we actually saw that from no other team. So Method EU here really putting the testament. This is going to be like make or break for them right here. If they make this pull, then
this is everything right now. Method EU pulls the entirety of the room and does very well to make sure that Tide's Emissary is kept out. We're that fortified, bursting volcanic as we speak, and it is incredibly scary what some of these caster mobs can do. We have 3 Witch Doctors chasing after the tank, each of them wanting to put out a ton of damage onto him, as well as those champions which do have the enrages. So Zalia with popping his Tree of Life already getting prepared to deal with that bursting.
Yeah, Tree of Life is definitely a pretty underused talent for Resto Druid just inside of this game. Whereas for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here, they're playing it a little bit more safe. They actually don't pull the whole entire room and have to kite it out. So the issue with actually pulling the whole entire room typically is those Witch Doctors, because they have a Shadow Bolt volley cast, which if it actually goes off, it will probably wipe your whole entire group. In addition to that, you don't have multiple soothes for those champions, so now doing a really good job of utilizing Ring of Peace and kiting, making sure the mobs stay stacked the whole entire time, and all the while making sure that he did get a little bit damage in to maintain threat throughout the whole entire pull.
That's right, and now with 20% of trash complete, they're going to be spawning the Golden Serpent boss, so they grab some of the Guardians outside and get them ready to go and pull with the Serpent, because those extra Guardians, they're not too difficult to deal with. You gotta watch out for the frontal, which faces wherever the tank is currently facing. As long as you have a good eye on them, as we're seeing markers going up over everyone's nameplates, it should be very easy to dodge as they take down the Serpent and the boss.
Yeah, so both teams actually are probably going to end up pulling this Emissary of the Tides into the Serpent with both of these Colossus mobs, just making sure that they do dodge out of that frontal, like you were saying. You can actually skip getting that Tides if you pull a specific mob that's in the corner pack. So that was the reason that they weren't really in danger. They actually had lockouts available for those Shadow Bolt volleys from the first pull. Whereas Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just taking it a little bit slower. They're dealing with the Emissary of the Tides, and they are going to start pulling the Golden Serpent in probably like 15 seconds from now.
That's right, and it kind of goes back to, what we've known so much about these teams and almost the fear that they put into their opponents. We've seen JB talk about it time and time again with his Method counterpart on the EU side, where he said, we have to pull, prepare, plan around this team because of what they're able to do.
Do you think that would kind of like get in your head a little bit?
Oh, I think it absolutely does. You have all this pressure on, okay, I feel pretty comfortable with this pull. This one looks really doable, we'll get it consistently, but are we pulling enough?
Yeah.
What are our opponents going to be doing? How are we going to be matching up with them against the bracket? What's our route that we're going to take? I mean, you got to think about it. Early on, NA is saying, okay, I expect to beat Team D, which they did yesterday, and they're saying, well, that puts us right up against our Method EU counterparts onto this one, and we have to be able to beat them or we're facing elimination.
Yeah, man, it would definitely get in my head if like every single thing you do, you're like, yeah, we're sick. And then you're like, man, they're pulling bigger than us, we suck.
Well, that's the other thing you have to think about from Buff War's side. They've never played against them, but they have to be able to sort of compare the times, because keep in mind, we've had some affix differences that don't quite make it a one-to-one comparison on that end. So when they're preparing, it's a bit of scary to them, because they're not exactly having everything at their disposal, not having that perfect apples to apples to compare that end, and Method EU pulling ahead as they take down the Golden Serpent.
I think it's also partially due to the fact that you don't like a war game versus other teams. So like you're actually playing against the dungeon in like a MDI style format, whereas
yeah, we're here. This is the MDI.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But like you're playing against the dungeon as opposed to playing like legitimately versus the team.
You're not interacting with your opponents.
Yeah, you're just comparing times, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that it also is very cool to start seeing the respect that these guys are showing for each other, the knowledge of, the type of mobs they have to deal with, the little things we've seen time and time again. That's what Method EU really likes, is when you're looking at them using, we saw it earlier where they're using Ring of Peace and Siege of Boralus to make sure they were knocking back one of the bosses, because if they knock it back, it gives them a couple extra seconds. And those things make up a massive amount of their job for this dungeon, for this competition, is knowing the little things, being able to prepare for them, and being able to take them down and work them into their strategies.
So in come the animated guardians. You actually saw on screen Xaylia walked out, tagged the animated guardians, also used mass root in order to be able to root those Shadows of Zul. Yeah, the Shadows of Zul, which will actually fear you if you actually get hit by them. They'll probably be walking up a little bit longer. Yep, you see them right off the corner of your screen. Xaylia will mass root them again. Of course, whenever we are in this bursting environment, it can be pretty dangerous if you do get those bursted while Xaylia or while you have trash going on. So they'll probably end up like shadow melding them off after these animated guardians plus this trash pack goes down.
I really like what they did there first with the Ursul's Vortex. That way he'd be able to ground all of them up, because the way that they got elongated from running all over the place and they were spread out a lot more, he makes sure he gets them all stacked together first and then is able to deal with it later. You do see Tree of Light going up for Xaylia there, so he might be preparing for that bursting damage if they're going to pop all of those shadows in a second.
I think realistically, the Tree of Life is probably just due to the first pull, right? That seems like that would make the most amount of sense. Just making sure that you get that first pull set up correctly, you can actually spam those instant cast regrowth straight into your tank, which normally, under most circumstances, your tank actually wouldn't need. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue, at the same time doing something very similar. Again, they're just a little bit behind from how much slower they did that first room, though.
That's right, and just being able to, it's just one of those things that it's sort of like their route, but you're just missing a couple key elements. How you're taking, 2 pulls, turning it into 1, making sure you're having that higher efficiency is always so important to start watching for these guys. And we've seen time and again, bringing multiple rogues is insanely important to be able to deal with all the skips required in this dungeon, because after the second boss, that bridge is a mess.
Yeah, just utilizing Shadow Meld and Double Shroud. Pretty important. We've seen some teams running like even triple rogue in here. There's some stuff that you can do with like Lightfoot Potion, like straight down the bridge to be able to make it all the way, or you of course have to run triple rogue if you don't want to use a Lightfoot Potion there.
And we have Corrupted Affix coming up next season onto that one. Make it so much easier to be skipping, and I'm excited for that one.
Yeah, that affix actually looks pretty solid overall. Yeah, I'm very excited for that. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue does down their couple constructs. Method U also getting those 2 down. You actually see them actually charging out their Latent Arcana, their Trinket, their Font of Power from Ashara as well. So
I like that they're running that. I mean, again, it might just be towards getting enough damage and getting enough DPS onto specific targets for the very first pull. That might just be what they must have in order to be able to kill it all quickly. But being able to make sure they still have time to wait for some of the roleplay for any of these Room of Kings, the Hall of Kings right here. They're able to still take advantage of it and make sure they clear this quickly so they can move forward.
I think in general, they may have enough time to be able to channel that Font of Power to its full duration whenever now we'll actually be grouping up mobs. But overall, it seems like it would be kind of awkward to be able to channel that thing to full duration whenever you're doing something like an MDI style stuff where everything is just go, go, go. How many mobs can I chain in at once?
It is pretty interesting that he's running it as well, but if you're able to accelerate your route so heavily by taking extra time to be able to get the channel off, be able to pull these larger setups, it's so much easier to take a couple extra seconds with a very heavy burst setup rather than having to put 1 pull and split it in 2.
Yep, and you see the Shadow Meld come through. All of those fixates that you actually did see on the members there go away because they actually drop combat there, and now Method U is going really, really large inside of this Machemba room, getting the constructs and all the embalming fluids with that Emissary, the Tides inside of the group as well.
That's right, and again, Tree of Life going up once again, getting all the hots ready, prepared, and set, as they're also grabbing both the Interment constructs. They will have to be dealing with any of the Imprisons that are going to be going out, and Xaylia just running circles around any of the goos that are going out, making sure that he's given the rest of the team a lot of space, as getting hit by any of those goos that are chasing Xaylia will slow you and add a very nasty poison.
I wonder what they're going to do here with the embalming fluids once they die. For a lot of times we actually do see people running away, as you do actually see all 3 people without immunities actually flee very quickly, running away so they don't get as many stacks of bursting. They get all the way into the corner of the room. They allow the 2 rogues to pop their cloak and do not get stacks.
I was going to say, Gingy popped his Cloak of Shadows first, so I was wondering if he'd pick up a couple extra stacks, but it wasn't too bad, and he was very well pre-hotted, so it wasn't too big of a deal on their end. And that's, again, we've seen that execution for these guys to make sure they're going to be able to get whatever they need, get into the position to take those mobs down. The Ursul's Vortex, the extra slows that were coming up on that side were just absolutely enough to make sure they got the job done. And now he's going to be a big thing to see if they're going to be able to start making sure Machemba goes down even quicker by getting people out of those coffins.
Why do you think Frag is playing Dwarf versus Gingy playing Night Elf? So in general, in King's Rest, Dwarf Racial will actually move some of the physical damage bleeds, such as those that come out of the Berserkers or Cool of the Butcher. That's normally the reason that you would actually be playing Dwarf Racial, but it's kind of weird to see Gingy on that Night Elf.
I think it could be a little bit weird to see it instead of taking advantage of the Shadow Meld as well, but you might not need it for some of the other effects. You might actually just want to have a little bit more escape possible at certain moments, making sure you're saying, all right, well, if there's too much pressure on Xaylia, we're going to be able to have a bit of an escape. Or you might just start having Frag be the one who's designated to help out now dealing with the Berserkers. You say, all right, he's going to be able to run in, take some of those Berserker cleaves when we don't have Riposte available or when we don't have any of the stuns available to start shutting out the Berserkers.
And it kind of looks like Buff War here is losing a little bit more ground. They're still on these Purification constructs, whereas Method EU has Machimba the Embalmer down around 30-ish%.
I mean, when you have a better route at your disposal, you're just going to continue to snowball to such great effect. I mean, Frag is Mr. Sweden, but really right now he's showing to be Mr. November.
So they just popped their Bloodlust here when Machimba's at 30% health. I bet it's so that they can actually skip a phase of the Entomb, so it actually kind of makes sense.
I think right now we're not able to avoid the Entombs entirely, so they just said, we just want to be able to kill this. We want to make sure that we're not getting anything extra after the fact, break him out really quickly, and I think that they're not going to immediately start pulling once they enter the bridge phase. We'll have to see onto that one, but we've seen a lot of teams instantly pull whatever's right in front of them onto the bridge. I'm curious if they're going to start skipping around a little bit, and that's why they're okay with wasting a little bit of the Bloodlust time.
They have a ton of count.
Oh, never. Here comes all the latent Arcanas. All right, I'm interested in seeing what they're going to pull out here. It's about timing for these guys, and we've seen a couple of moments in particular where Method EU has gone faster than their practice routes, and they just didn't have Bloodlust available for them. So they might have just said, hey, we just need a Bloodlust on cooldown.
So this is actually hilarious. They actually ended up pulling both of those packs there. Most of the time, you'll elect to not pull the Emissary.
Now he's got 3 stacks of the bleed onto him. Xaylia does get the res up very quickly. We are going to see a couple of riposts coming up from Frag to make sure that he's going to be able to survive some of the incoming damage, but that was very scary. He was not able to dodge, stun, avoid any of those bleeds. But they are stabilized in the group. You're seeing Cenarian Ward going up on now, so he'll have a ton of healing as the Life Loom and Reju follow.
Yeah, that's why that pull is pretty dangerous, and you actually had Xaylia rooting the Tides out of the pack, using his Tree of Life instant cast roots to be able to deal with that pretty easily. Maybe there was just an issue of just healing throughput on the tank. Now actually died with Last Stand and Spell Reflect available to him, so I kind of wonder what actually ended up occurring there.
There's that 3-stack bleed to the Berserker onto that one. He was just so heavy. It was just so much damage that was going out onto him, and if you're going to be having casters getting any extra damage off as well, it just adds more problems to them. But again, they've shaken off, they've taken care to make sure they're not going to be, letting these mistakes get to them. Love that Ring of Peace as the Shroud goes up, and they are just speed potting to get to the last boss room.
Yeah, so Brutes, especially in MDI scenarios, big, really large time sink just because of the uptime not available on them. So we've actually seen a lot of teams historically just looking to skip them. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue is making its way into this room. They're actually doing a little bit different of a pull. They're actually skipping the first 3-pack, and they're actually doing the back 2 mobs as Ching actually does go down, and looks like Marito also has fallen as well. So that's going to be really bad for Buff 4 Nerf Rogue.
That's right, just chalking up all these extra deaths. They should be in range for the mass res if they're going to be able to avoid the Brute's patrol. But one of the things that's so important to look at for this is that you got to make sure you know exactly where the Brute's going to be for all the timings. That way you'll be able to get past them. I mean, we saw it on the side of Method EU. They knew where the Brute was going to be, Ring of Peace it out of the way. That way they could shroud around it without a hassle.
Yeah, it's definitely being interesting. So you actually see Method EU here. They pull some of the Berserkers into Cool of the Butcher here. They actually were able to deal with that pretty easily. Just making sure that they ended up using any of their Dwarf Racials, any of their defensives whenever Kula is casting that Whirling Axe onto them. That is fairly important. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue has got that Mass Res off and is trying again. Just making sure that if for some reason Method EU did have a pretty catastrophic mistake here, they would be able to capitalize on it. The Spectral Berserker has finally entered the arena where Method EU is currently fighting, but they do have it paralysis off up to the side.
I like that. They actually grabbed one off the pole, brought it in with Kula as they had all their damage and cooldowns available to them, and then they just offered to para it. They got Latent Arcanas channeling as they're ready to start the second round, and I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing the Berserker come in soon.
Yep, so you actually did see Gingy there use his riposte to be able to, what was it, like a dodge?
Yeah, it's to be able able to parry any of the incoming damage from the Berserker to just parry any of the debuffs there. Makes it so that the tank's going to be having a much easier time dealing with it here.
Yeah, so that's how that's going. Xaylia is actually doing an incredible amount of damage on this fight that historically requires a large amount of healing.
Well, I think on that end, that's where you're taking advantage of the Shadow Melds, you're taking advantage of any of the racials and the dodge effects that are available to you to make your life that much easier to be able to bring them down. Really love the big focus onto that Earthwall Totem once they took care of the explosive. They split their focus, that way they'd be able to take down the two most annoying or deadly totems first and make sure that they're not having that constant shielding stacking up.
It looks like Ching actually ended up falling whenever they were actually doing their shroud skip throughout that, so he's getting mass res here. Again, that's
just more time that it's eating up right now, and those are the mistakes you just can't make because King's Rest requires such precision here.
Yeah, overall this dungeon is actually pretty insane. You guys see Atal'Dazar being pulled here. I wonder when they're going to actually pull the Berserker here. As it is parried off to the side, maybe pulling it like at the very bottom of Atal'Dazar will be...
I would imagine they'd start, if any time, it would be right now as you're seeing Mirrors running into position to be able to go grab it. So he does ping it and starts sending it all. Unless he runs over and repairs it.
Okay,
I guess he just repaired. Might just be that they don't have to deal with it at all because they have 84%. They're going to be able to get another 4-ish out of Shadow of Zul onto that end. So it might just be leaving it, grabbing all the other mobs because they're going to be upstairs once the cutscene ends, and then just Shadow melding it off. I mean, you're going to have a Berserker already in that upstairs pack, plus you have Beastmaster, Honored Raptor as well. So you have a lot of other deadly mobs that should be enough trash for them, I would think.
But I mean, this would be efficient to do, right? I mean,
it would be, but there's the added threat that you're not quite going to be able to deal with some of those bleed debuffs if you're having the tank kiting, for example. If any time that you would want to bring the Berserker in, you bring one in for Kula like they did, and then bring the second one in for the Totem that they had in second. So,
yeah, so
I think at this point they're just going to refresh that para once again, and they're just going to skip it entirely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Whereas on the side of Buff 4 Nerf Rogue, you actually do see a para coming out on their Berserker
Yeah, there
as
was
well.
the Shadow Meld.
Okay, so yeah, the Shadow Melt, everybody channels their Latent Arcana, and they're actually doing this pack with the Emissary of the Tides.
Yep, and Emissary of the Tides usually isn't too terribly deadly. You got the Hex Priest with damage going out, but Spell Reflect does come up early, and we'll probably expect to see Last Stand or Shield Wall. Either of them available. Maybe, and if they have the healing at their disposal, if they're not too worried about that dot damage coming in from the Berserker, and they have a reasonable way to be able to avoid the second dot. Oh, there's Last Stand. I was about to say, I think that they're going to have to use one cooldown and then save the other one for the Shadow of Zul.
Yeah, Shadow of Zul is pretty dangerous towards Protection Warriors because they only have that Spell Reflect to be able to deal with magic damage. Of course, they do have flat DR from like Shield Wall. They also have some HP that they can get from like Rallying Cry and stuff like that. But overall, Protection Warrior not exactly the greatest tank at dealing with the Shadow of Zul. But on this 18 fortified setting, all of these tanks are pretty well equipped to be able to deal with it.
That's right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a lot of single target healing to make sure that your tank is going to be surviving. And I love the control that we're seeing for that Honored Raptor. They're shutting it down in as many ways as they can. First we saw the Ursul's Vortex, then we're just seeing Typhoon coming up, then we're seeing Ring of Peace coming up. Actually, they don't have Typhoon, sorry. They were seeing the Ring of Peace coming up right there to make sure that they're shutting it down, getting that Raptor back into it, and nobody's getting cleaved.
Yeah, Buff 4 Nerf Rogue here is going to be downing Zanzal. They're going to start on Atal'Dazar as well, but it looks like it may just be a little bit too little too late for them. They're pretty far behind.
I think that at the beginning, Method EU started the snowball and have continued to be able to build that snowman right now because Shadow of Zul's in their sights. Otherwise, they will be complete with trash and they will be able to take this game number one because they have been so clean and so efficient, even with one death.
You've been hanging out with Slew too much.
From time to time. Yeah, we only raided together.
So what do you actually think about the Tree of Life coming in from Xaylia inside of this dungeon?
I think that one of the biggest things that this has kind of started is, oh, I saw them running this for MDI. Are we supposed to be running this for live keys? And where does the debate come in? Since the backbone of all of your trash percentage is coming from these large attempts from pulling everything in the Golden Serpent's room. You need to be able to have this thing at your disposal. You need to be able to have Tree of Life to consistently be able to have the throughput. Yes, you can be able to pull it away with Cultivation. It does give you that extra hot stack for your Mastery to take advantage of it, but I think it's an unnecessary risk to not take it in a dungeon like this because of how big that Method EU is going.
Yep, and Shadow of Zul does go down, and they actually end up killing that one last minion of Zul. They're going to be making their way towards this Void Touch Emissary. Maybe they'll melt it off, maybe they'll just stay in combat with it. Doesn't really matter either way.
Yeah, pretty much. At that point, once they get their pre-pots off and stuff, they don't really have to worry about melding if they don't need to. At that point, and they can maybe just use it for something a little bit later. Like if they're going to get jumped on, for example, from King Dazar, they could just hold their Shadow Meld for that point and avoid the jump entirely. That way they don't have to worry about it, as it happened right there. So we're seeing Xaylia getting it instead of the melee, uses his Wild Charge to be able to get back and reduce the damage that he's taking. So they can just weave it in whenever they need to.
Yeah, you actually see Buff Warner Frog here doing one of the final trash pulls that they actually need to do prior to pulling the Shadow of Zul. But again, they're just so far behind. They're basically just praying for a wipe from Method EU here.
And I don't think it's going to be that easy, as we're seeing King Dazar getting down to 70%. They're just offering light cleave damage onto Raban, because as we saw with that Raptor before they encountered Zul, they are masters at shutting this mob down or kiting away from it.
It's kind of interesting how far behind Buff War actually ended up falling after the second boss here. You can actually just kind of see their splits, the split times at the bottom of the screen. Just those deaths where you had to mass res multiple times. Loda had that pretty clutch play where he melded and then had to mass res the whole entire group. They just had major issues on the bridge but their issues actually began in the first boss room as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is just, yes, it'll be tough to be able to deal with first boss room, tough to deal with certain pulls, but it's always on that bridge where you start losing the most time. Previously it was, okay, we're 30 seconds or a minute behind, something like that, and that gap just absolutely expands to a monumental level when there is just so much that you have to deal with and so much on the line when you pull any of those bridge packs.
Yep, and you actually do see the Bloodlust coming out for Method EU for the final few percent of Dazar.
See, this is it. They were going too fast. They were just going too quickly throughout the dungeon. Like, they would have loved to be able to Bloodlust when Sala came out, for example, but they were just going so much faster than the route. They're like, all right, we're going to get Bloodlust for some point of Dazar, where it probably will be at the very, very tail end, and it'll be worth it for them.
Yeah, these guys are talking about how the feeling of actually hitting your best time run whenever you actually are on the stage is some of the best feelings possible. And overall, this Method EU run was very, very smooth.
Absolutely dominant as they do take down King Dazar and do seal game number 1. Something even better for this one.
Yeah, we got to see something that is Guy Fieri level pathing. They need to take him to Flavor Town. They need something spicy, Tettles.
Yeah, definitely going to have something spicy inside of this teaming Reaping Freehold that we actually see coming out. Where both of these guys will end up blocking the Reaping will actually be fairly important as well, just seeing what's going on. You actually do see both teams running a very mirrored composition, double Unholy Death Knight with one Outlaw Rogue, one Mistweaver Monk, and then one Protection Warrior.
Oh, I love the Mistweaver Monks. The way the crane popping off as Buff War Nerf Rogue's been taking a ton of damage, but Loda's able to heal it up with 130k HPS, not breaking a sweat, just spinning as they're taking down the last mobs and ready to proc Reaping and start up our first boss. They're doing it faster than Method at the moment.
Yeah, welcome to Flavor Town, Jack. So you actually do see here, they actually do also elect to use their first Bloodlust on the Reaping mobs on top of Skycap'n Cragg. Method EU has not used their Bloodlust yet. They have their first...
About to do the same thing?
Yeah, probably about to do the same thing as they had the first Reaping wave coming into Cragg here. You do see that Bloodlust come out.
That's right, and they're making sure they're grabbing up all those mobs. You're only seeing, Xaylia's kind of sitting back and he's not worried about spinning too much and be able to get all that damage, because again, the focus is going to be on single target when possible to make sure that these DKs have what they need. He just did one spin, got the debuff onto the mobs for Mystic Touch, and that was it.
Yeah, so realistically, in that first phase of Skycap'n Cragg, whenever he is above 75% HP, he's actually very dangerous, so you need to make sure that you're doing as much healing as possible. It's kind of interesting to see how low Loda is actually on mana right now.
Yeah, it's very scary, especially when we're considering that they're taking the new Ashara staff from the Eternal Palace. So if he drops below that 10% mana range, he will proc the staff and do it much earlier than he would like. So he's getting a bit more mana back now that he's sitting back at range, but you are seeing him with Way of the Crane up, running into melee, getting in some big damage as well. Xaylia taking a big hit on that one. I think he was just trying to drop his Transcend or just be able to bait out any of the bird goos that were going on right there. But you got to be able to kind of balance out when you can deal damage and when you got to be running all over the place to be able to manage the bird and make sure your melee don't have to do squat.
Yeah, whenever Zamak was actually playing this series, I think he was actually just standing at range the whole entire time, right?
So Xaylia's going the extra mile onto this one. It's a lot more work, but the results speak for themselves right now. Method EU pulled the boss well after Buff War Nerf Rogue, But right now they are in a dead heat right here as the damage is just catching up.
Yeah, they were actually 10% behind whenever they pulled the boss, but Zalia's antics with rolling in and then rolling out again just actually allowed them to catch up. So now they're only a few seconds behind what was actually a significantly slower first pull.
Couple 100,000 damage extra just adds up and speaks for itself right now, as we're seeing Gingy on the other hand running a bit ahead of the group. He's going to start the RP very early, so he's going off on his own little journey right now as we speak. Make sure that he is going to be talking to the tender in the ring of booty and getting everything set up. As you see Marito start the drinks, you're seeing probably everybody but one person grabbing those drinks, and that way they'll be able to activate just a little bit later.
Yeah, you actually do see Gingy as well. He grabbed that drink whenever he was on his way over, just allowing them to pull all of this trash, and once their pack actually ends up getting grouped up, then they will be able to pull it straight into the boss instantly. This was actually insanely efficient from Method EU, and I actually think this will actually save them a lot of time.
Oh, here we go. Zalia doing a lot of the pulls for the tank, making sure now gets what he needs. We're going to see Way of the Crane pop it up in just a moment. Thunder Focus T going up, and we're seeing the Council of Captains being pulled in a very, very surprising fashion. 1.8 million damage for both of them, almost to 2 million for Frag and Mears right now, as they just obliterated this pack and are putting so much damage into the bosses.
Yeah, and here come Buff 4 Nerf Rogue as well, looking to do a similarly mirrored pull. Both of their DKs dropping their D&Ds, popping their own Holy Frenzies as they actually nuke down to the bosses as well.
They're not going down without a fight. We're pretty close here in terms of boss percentage and trash. Enough to the fact that we're having Reaping rolling around for the second time for both teams right now. This is a very close showing right now, and you were saying it before, we can't count Buff 4 Nerf Rogue out.
Yeah, they were definitely the dark horse of the series. Like, overall, if they play consistently, both of these teams are going to be neck and neck just for this dungeon. For the KR, a little bit different. Their pathing maybe was a little bit worse, but overall in Freehold, it feels like this dungeon is kind of figured out as in terms of how big you can actually go, how few pulls you can do, how to maximize your pathing during the RP and stuff like that. You actually do see Frag there grabbing that barrel, getting that damage buff that is associated with that as well.
That's right, just 18% left on Captain Jolly as Method EU and Buff 4 Nerf Rogue are, of course, taking down both the bosses a couple seconds apart from each other. Just a 1% difference in terms of trash. It seems at this point, Zettles, who are you giving the advantage to? I mean, is there anything in particular that we're going to be seeing different in the routings? Because so far it's been absolute mirrors.
We're going to see how both of these groups end up dealing with the back half in terms of their pathing. I think this like 10% advantage actually came from Gingy running off at the very beginning, getting that pig RP started a little bit earlier, making sure that he could get his drink just a little bit earlier, so his team didn't have to wait for him to get back, whereas Buff 4 Nerf Rogue had to just like stand there for a few seconds.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, and we'll have to see as they do end up grabbing the pig. They start the RP just a little bit quicker, but Buff 4 Nerf Rogue isn't too interested in grabbing the pig just yet. They are going to be grabbing all these mobs, going right into the ring, then grabbing the pig, and then activating Ludwig von Tortolan. So a little bit of difference right now as to how they're generating the pull, how they're getting set up. Method EU, of course, grabbing the mobs into Ludwig first, though.
These harpooners with Volcanic is actually kind of hilarious.
Oh, no.
It looked like Mira's actually almost got grabbed into a volcano there. It was very dangerous, but...
Oh, Frag is going down right now.
He got threat on everything. He actually even used his Shadow Melt. He used like all of his defensives and everything to try to stay alive, but unfortunately, the tricks of the trade plus Now's damage just wasn't enough, snapping threat on everything, costing them 5 seconds and that battle res. I don't think it's going to cost them too much, but... it's not
these
not
things
exactly
happen, and being able to control your threat and control the massive damage that you'll be dealing to all of these mobs as your tank just struggles to be able to hold on. It's such a challenge for these guys, and it's one of those things you always got to keep in the back of your head is when can I use Shadow Meld, when can I time it appropriately, but when you're already taking many melee hits after that, you just grab the battle res, you got a backup plan.
Yeah, and I think that's actually going to kind of equalize the time between these two teams.
I think so too. That 5 seconds, a little bit of damage lost onto that one.
Did he lose Festermite stacks or not? Kind of those kind of things that you have to think of whenever you're really assessing what is lost. Because just the 5 seconds plus the battle res, not exactly the worst possible thing, but how much resources he potentially could have lost.
Well, that when the game is this close right now, I mean,
yes.
You're seeing them round up the next set of mobs, and we've seen a little bit earlier as to when they're going to start proccing the next wave of Reaping, whether they're going to just have 2 consecutive waves going up on Harlan Sweete side, or if they're going to try to proc something a little bit earlier, then pull it into Trothak, and then just have the next mass wave of undead mobs come at them.
Yeah, so you saw Ching there doing a little bit of dance while he's waiting for Trothak to actually come in. Whereas on the side of Method EU, they actually all ran as a group. They were pulling a bunch of mobs, and you see that their mobs are 75% health whenever they're going to be pulling Trothak, whereas Buff War Nerf Rogue is going to have a little bit less efficient, like in terms of like how they're pulling the mobs, just from what side of the dungeon you actually got them from.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as well as Method EU has finished off all those mobs, 78% left on trash as Trothak is going down for both teams. Not too far off in terms of overall percent on this one. I think it's really going to have to come down to Harlan Sweete and who's going to get the bigger advantage.
This is not great for Buff War Nerf Rogue. I actually think Method EU is about to proc their 80% reaping here with just
now
these
that
yellow
they're grabbing
mobs.
all these guys. It's interesting that they're going to end up doing that. I think it's a lot better because we saw out of, was it Method NA and Abra earlier, where they were proccing reaping once they got into Harlan Sweete's side. But I think this is going to work out better for taking Trothak down more rapidly.
Yeah, I definitely do agree, because you are actually able, with those Unholy Death Knight cooldowns, you are able to convert a lot of your AoE.
Does that last guy give enough? Maybe they just go, okay, he does give enough onto that one. I wasn't quite sure, since they give like fractions of percents. So we're going to see the next round of reaping coming up. And I think the big threat on this one is how long Ludwig's soul is going to last, though. I could definitely understand it not wanting to proc that reaping because you knew that Ludwig would take such a long time to die. So if they're having Trothak die before Ludwig, it just wastes more time when otherwise they could have procced it later on.
Yeah, so basically the TLDR, that is Ludwig, his Risen Soul spawns with 50% of his HP on a fortified setting. That is a pretty sizable chunk. If Trothak actually does end up going down before that Lost Soul, Ludwig von Tortollen, that's just going to be a little bit inefficient of the proc of reaping, right? It's just going to cost you a little bit more time that you would just be standing there, single target DPSing down this Lost Soul of Ludwig. Whereas for Buff War Nerf Rogue, they're probably going to proc their last reaping in Harlan Sweete's room.
Yeah, as you're looking at it right now, I mean, Trothak's about to go down, whereas Ludwig's at 40% HP, so they need to be able to put a little bit more cleave off onto them to make sure that they die together. They're going to be able to be taken down quickly so that they can go to Harlan Sweete's room, because Buff War Nerf Rogue is going to be able to quickly make up that missing percentage in Harlan Sweete's room when you have the Ravagers going off, when you have all that extra damage. But I guess you really don't care, because you can just go and Shadow Melt.
Okay, so this is actually really nice for Method EU. That instead of like having to solo kill Ludwig and like be able to mount up, they're actually just going to ring a piece it, Lightfoot all the way away, pop their Shadow Meld to drop combat. Now they're getting mounted up. They're going to be shrouded into Harlan Sweete's room, and they only have to get 20% count, whereas Buff War Nerf Rogue is fighting an uphill battle here, and they need 28% count on this boss.
That's right, and as they're getting some of the saps out onto these mobs, they're getting themselves ready, and we saw out of the teams earlier pulling everything with Harlan Sweete, so they're making sure we're probably going to see some Channel Arcanas going out right now and just diving straight into these bosses as cooldowns are ready. Army of the Dead as well is set to go. 45 seconds left on Bloodlust. Again, they're just too fast for their Bloodlust to be able to use it on the pull.
I mean, both teams are too fast for their Bloodlust. They're both going insanely quick on this dungeon. Both mirroring pulls. Unfortunately, Buff War Nerf Rogue is behind 10% trash count, so they're going to have
They can make that up quick.
Yeah, it's really easy to make that up, especially on Harlan Sweete, because the Cannonball Barrage does hit trash, but they're also going to proc their reaping onto it too.
I think the reaping is going to be more of an advantage than disadvantage, to be honest. I mean, once they get, was it 70 or 60%? I mean, they're going to hit either of those very quickly. They'll be able to get cannon fire on everybody, which will help kill reaping. They just need to be mass pulling more sets of trash right now to make sure they're able to catch up in percentage, because that's really the only separation. I mean, boss health isn't too terribly different from each other, and keep in mind, Method EU has one death.
So basically, do you think this comes down to who actually kills Harlan first, then?
Absolutely, yes. I don't think that they really have to worry. As long as they keep on pulling trash here, like, once that second cast goes up, I guess it is at 60%, they should instantly grab the next pack, grab everything that they need. Bloodlust is going to be going up. This is their opportunity, but keep in mind, Method EU has Bloodlust as well.
So Bloodlust is actually a very interesting cooldown, especially on something like Harlan Sweete. Once Harlan drops below 30%, he actually does take 50% increased damage. However, whenever you were deciding where to Bloodlust, whenever you have to decide, like, is it better to use it in his increased damage taken phase versus not, it actually comes down to where your cooldowns are available. You normally match, you use Bloodlust whenever the cooldowns are up, not necessarily whenever the boss is taking an increased damage taken.
We'd like to see these Ashara staffs getting procced as well. I mean, Zalia's in a prime position to be able to do it right now. The second he gets his way of the crane back, he should be able to drop below that 10% threshold to be able to proc it. But you really want to get it up on the boss right now. Harlan Sweete about to die. They need as much damage as they can get. All the trash is taken care of. Harlan Sweete is about to die, and I don't quite think Buff War Nerf Rogue's going to be able to do it in 5 seconds right now.
Yeah, so that was a big 2-0 for Method EU, but not to discredit Buff War, that was a very close match.
I think that's just one of
able to get the redemption he so rightly loves and so rightly wants to see here. Abrakeydabra, Method EU, both engaging in with the council right now. That's Heartsbane Triads, ironic.
And we're seeing a similar strategy that we saw in the previous Waycrest Manor. And even if we look at that Waycrest Manor that Abrakeydabra had against Method today, there was really only one major problem they had. That was the skip on Soulbound Goliath. And I know that Dr. J is not going to make the same mistake again. So really, I'm looking forward to what happens there. But here on the Heartsbane Triad, these guys are already pretty much neck and neck with Method. You just eking out a tiny advantage so far.
That's right, and it'll be looking to see, you know, who's going to start getting slight advantages here and there. I don't think that the games are going to be as snowbally as we've seen previously. You know, Method EU is able to just continue to generate and build such a hefty lead against Buff or Nerf Rogue. But on this one, if Abrakeydabra is on point, if they have that ice in their veins like Jay usually does when he's playing Mage, you really expect to be able to see that higher caliber at a consistent basis.
Yeah, and something interesting here. I mean, we don't really talk, well, you talk about the Mistweaver Monk a lot, but it's just so interesting to see how important that Ring of Peace is to keep these mobs away from the bosses here. It's so dangerous on the Sanguine Affix to pull trash with the Heartsbane Trio because they don't move that much, and seeing them perfectly execute these Ring of Pieces on every single time the trash is about to die, that's so important. If one mob doesn't get hit there, if one of them stays on top of the boss, that's almost a full boss reset because there's no way you're going to beat the cast next time around.
That's right, and it's one of those things that keeps on coming into play and keeps on coming into consideration is having that laser focus to know exactly when you need to drop that Ring of Peace, know exactly when you need to use those cooldowns. Xaylia, unfortunately, procking his staff there. Something you really hate to see because you want to be able to find some other good area to be able to use that on trash or use it as just like a backup, to assist you if you end up dropping low, and using it on the very first boss of a 5-boss dungeon, you hate to see it.
It's something really interesting to me. I was paying pretty close attention to how the teams were pulling the dungeon the last time I saw Waycrest Manor with Method, and they pulled a little bit of extra trash with the first boss, but it set them behind almost 20-25 seconds. We see both teams opting to go for just that 2% of trash, just one side of the room, whereas I think Method and A pulled both. So just seeing these teams have such similar strategies with just a little bit of a DPS advantage for Method EU is it's pretty crazy to see.
It is, and it's also very interesting how well these teams can do when they have differences in the routes, you know, finding out what's going to be the most efficient for them, what's going to be the best, because in many cases we haven't really seen the big differences going head-to-head for every single team. We haven't seen what is the most optimized route, the best route that we're going to be going for. You know, Method EU pulling the Void Emissary and grabbing everything around it.
It's important to mention how difficult this particular section of trash is. You have to make sure that Void Touched Emissary dies before the second Queen's Decree, or people are going to drop incredibly low. That's a little bit scary, though. They have to commit a couple of personal cooldowns to that. You see the Icebound Fortitude's going on cooldown for both of the Unholy DKs. But really, once again, just like it is in almost every other map in the tournament, the double Unholy DK is really what enables these large types of pulls. Usually, you wouldn't want to pull half of this. These captains do so much tank damage, even on the tyrannical settings. So just having those Unholy DKs for the insane amount of AoE damage they bring, it really enables the pulls you see these guys doing.
I love the patience out of Divine Field there, waiting to grab all of the hounds up together, making sure they're all in the right spot. That way the group is going to be able to start spacing out any of the Sanguine puddles, get them where they need to be, and make sure they're going to be able to take down that Void Touched Emissary. Not too bad to be able to line of sight behind the fountain onto this one, but just about the positioning and making sure they're getting it perfectly as now is just now entering the courtyard.
And we're seeing a little bit of difference in pull styles here from both teams. Method EU decided to go inside and pull that large captain pack that we were just talking about, whereas the normal strategy we see from a lot of teams, including Abrakeydabra, is they'll pull the Soulbound Goliath, the second boss, and around 50% they'll decide to then have a rogue go inside, tricks to trade all of that trash to their tank, and then they'll try to cleave that trash down and have it coincide with the boss's death, so they don't have to worry about Sanguine healing up the boss. I'm pretty sure that's what we're going to see here, but really what I'm looking at here is making sure Dr. J gets this skip off perfectly last time around, and it looks... Is the trash coming? It didn't. He got the skip off this time around. He got the vanish off. The trash stayed in place. Perfect execution from them. They don't have to worry about any this time around. That caused them to reset the boss last time. It caused them to have to completely shadow meld, skip, and pull everything all over again. So that's going to save them a solid 2 minutes over what the previous performance was, and we're going to see them able to just AoE this on top of the boss with that Unholy DK.
And this is the pull that they wanted to be able to have. They wanted to be able to round up all of these mobs together. You're seeing Way the Crane being used to great effect. I was kind of surprised that they didn't wait just a little bit longer to be able to fully optimize it. in maybe having one of the clears for the Soulbound Goliath instead. But nevertheless, they are getting some incredible damage out, and they are dropping all the Sanguine Puddles far away like they need to, and making the tank's life just a whole lot easier as a result.
Yeah, perfect. You'll have to see no Sanguine ticks going on the boss here. And likely we'll see them pull even more trash into the boss just to make sure they're taking full advantage of that AoE efficiency, just making sure the Unholy DKs can do as much as they want, because otherwise you're just single targeting down a tyrannical boss, which is in no way efficient.
That's right. You wanted to see Divine clearing out those stacks a little bit earlier, but the fire did end up dissipating earlier than imagined. But I do like what we're seeing out of Zmaki, staying away from any of the ads that are going to be putting out those burning fists, making sure he popped Diffused Magic. He dropped Enveloping Mist on himself to ensure that he'd be able to keep himself topped, as of course the DKs were able to just take advantage of AMS, take advantage of their own self-heals, and were able to deal with it without any problem. We've seen a lot of times where Mistweavers are running really low on mana on this fight, especially when they were pulling other trash mobs in. So it's a very challenging encounter, and we're even seeing like Ephemeral Recovery, the Azurite trait coming up on the side of Smok, so he has a little bit of extra breathing room in case his mana drops a little bit low.
And of course he did have to kite it once again, like you mentioned, into the fire there just to reset the boss's stack so he's not taking too much damage. And we're pretty much neck and neck on this boss with both these two teams, with the boss being around 40-45%. But of course Method EU has that little bit of an advantage. They've killed more trash because they decided to do that hallway pull first. And of course, just to remedy that, we see Abrakeydabra getting another couple of mobs on top of the boss, which will get them closer to the mob count of Method EU. And of course this will also help their single target damage a little bit. You know, they want to be stacking up the Festermite on the Unholy DKs. They want to allow the Rogue to get their extra single target damage from their, from their Keep Your Wits About You trade as well. So this is just really efficient in terms of making sure they get the boss down quickly. And you can see they're kind of pulling ahead in boss damage here.
That's right. I think we're at a close enough level that it's just going to be coming down to how well they're going to execute on some of these very big pulls. But when you're having a little bit of extra second lead, those things are just going to continue to grow. I mean, that's what happened with the Freehold run that we saw against Method EU and Buff or Nerf Rogues. Just a couple seconds here and there when the teams are at this level makes all the difference.
I mean, we saw Method EU do the exact same thing. Pull those same mobs into the boss, get that little extra bit of single target burst just from having the cleave available there, and they kind of pulled back that advantage too. So these guys are just neck and neck. The only difference, of course, being the extra mob count that Method EU has. I'm interested to see what kind of extra trash Abrakeydabra is going to have to pull later on in order to make that up.
That's right. We're seeing the last bit of Soulbound Goliath for both teams right now, as we were seeing Zmaki staying far away, getting into a nice comfortable position to be able to start topping everybody off. A lot of pressure being put onto a Shine, and I think he did catch a couple of those burning fists right there, but they got it recovered. We are seeing Soulbound Goliath going down for both teams as we're getting ourselves ready to go into Raal's room. 9% difference in trash between both teams. No deaths for either of them.
Yeah, and this is usually where we see those huge pulls being pulled right on top of Raal. They don't have Bloodlust available, but they have the double Unholy DKs available to do that massive AoE burst, so we'll be able to see just how well they're able to deal with this. This is a huge pull here. I'm curious to see what we're going to see from the Unholy DKs here.
I'd love to be able to see this. We are going to see a massive amount of DK damage sprouting up right now. Huge healing coming out of Zmaki, and you know that he's going to love all the damage he's going to be able to get out of this one. They're running out of the room right now. They got to watch for that enchanted emissary, as they had to kind of stop DPS really quick so they wouldn't be getting hit by any of the spell reflex. But look at this room just filling up with Sanguine. It's causing the Rune Carver to still stay alive. The Etch cast. Usually you don't want to get it at all, but Method EU on this side just having a full wipe as they entered the Hunter's room. They're not going to be able to sustain this one. Jinji getting frozen, now about to go down, and Abrakeydabra, the door is now open for them.
I mean, we were about to talk about how big that Runeweaver healing to full was, but they can just cleave it down with Raal. A full wipe for Method EU there. It looks like now went down first, then of course one of the DKs afterwards because he had aggro on everything. They weren't able to get the battle res off in time. Just a full team wipe there is going to be awful for them, and they're going to have to go all the way back around the dungeon. Actually, I believe they opened the door, so they shouldn't be it should be that big of a thing for travel, but still, the full team wipe, the 30 seconds on the board, plus now being behind in trash to a team they were ahead of, they're so far behind now.
Yeah, this is absolutely disastrous. I mean, Abrakeydabra knows this feeling well. The last time they were in Waycrest, would just have this pull not work out for you. The way that this dungeon is set up is just so punishing if you're missing something in your usual route and you have to start questioning the rest of it. What is available to you, whether you just go back and repeat the same thing as it looks like they're going to be doing here and looking to make some corrections.
And I mean, they kind of have to do this. They have to go back and make sure they're doing the same pull because that's what their mob count comes from. They skipped everything else, so they're probably looking to skip most of the trash later on in the dungeon, so they do want to finish off the trash that they already pulled. Just goes to show they had to actually go all the way around the entire dungeon just to get back to this point, which is, probably a good 20 seconds of travel time. So on top of the 30-second death timers, that cost them, I would say, over a minute of just travel time, not to mention how long it took them to wipe. So like you mentioned, the door is wide open for Abra here, and we're going to see them kind of single targeting Raal for a little while here, too.
Yeah, and at that point, it's just they're getting an advantage on Raal, who does take quite a long time to be able to bring down, even with all the cleave at their disposal. So that Hunter's Lodge is filling up with those blood pools from Sanguine, as Method EU is just trying to be able to get back and recover as best as they possibly can. But keep in mind, I mean, we've seen them down and out before with Shrine of the Storm, and they were able to bounce back and capitalize off of any of their opponent's mistakes.
Well, that's the important thing with Method EU. I mean, once again, we talked about this all day long. Method EU's biggest opponent, generally speaking, is themselves. They usually have the faster strategies, they usually have the faster execution and higher DPS. If they have a problem, their biggest strength is being able to stay concentrated, not make any more mistakes, to give themselves to come back in the dungeon should their opponent make a mistake.
And now let's watch Method EU as they're getting into Raal's room right now with a very large pull. And again, we saw in a Method NA the control that they were able to have over Sanguine. Very curious to see how Method EU is going to be taking on. We're seeing that Ring of Peace coming out late. We saw previously the amount of kiting that's required to be able to get these mobs away. I really like now running out of melee once any of the AoEs are coming out from the boss. That way he's able to drop the Sanguine pools where he needs to, and then get back onto the boss to be able to bring get all that aggro back. So very important to watch the positioning onto this one, and might have a couple people taking some extra melee strikes from Raal, which is not too bad, just to make sure that Sanguine stays far away from this guy.
Yeah, realistically, what you're looking to do here is just give yourself one opening so you can melee the boss, and you can see that's exactly what Now did there. They have one little sliver that they can attack the boss, and they will have to move when it does his frontals again, but honestly, in the grand scheme of things, making sure you get that AoE pull clean with no Sanguine healing is way more important than a little bit of extra boss damage. And you know what? The rogue will be able to hit the boss at pretty much any point, too, with those acrobatic strikes, so it's not that big of a deal for them.
Yeah, it's tough to be able to optimize. It just goes to show how well both of these teams have practiced this setup and how successful it is making them throughout this run. And looking at the trash percentage right now, Method EU did have that big wipe, but they have all of their trash before they have to go downstairs into the basement, whereas Abrakeydabra needs one more pull before they're able to get that, with Dr. J at 2% HP. He doesn't proc cheat death, though. He does recover onto that one, so Abrakeydabra needs one more pull before they'll be able to go downstairs into the basement.
I would say that he cheated his cheat death there, because
he did.
He was standing in so much stuff on the ground. It got down to 2% HP. It deserved to be proc there. He's lucky it didn't. So great to have that later on, especially for the pull that they're probably planning on doing with Lord and Lady Waycrest. They have the Bloodlust available. I'm interested to see if they plan on using it there at Gorak Tul later on. Both of them are just as dangerous, so really it's just kind of a heads-up play.
And the heads-up play is really what they're going to need onto this one. And as they're getting ready to go downstairs and pop their Shadow Meld, they're going to make sure they're getting themselves ready. I guess they're going to have to go back upstairs since they didn't end up pulling any of the shadows at the very start of the entrance as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right. Usually you want to have around 80 to 82% trash here when you get to this section of the dungeon, because there's only about 20% trash left for you to get. So, like you mentioned, once they get to Gorak Tul, they'll have to port back up to the start of the dungeon using the NPC that you can talk to, and they'll have to finish off the trash that way. This is it's probably it's probably part of their strategy, but it's just kind of weird to see this. This actually goes back to week 1 when we saw Method EU do this strategy.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is one of the early strategies that was developed, and when you see a team that first built the strategy, they don't run it anymore, they don't bother with it anymore, it really makes you think that this is something that's kind of a throwback that they shouldn't be going after.
Yeah, I mean, Raal the Gluttonous going down for Method EU right now, a minute and 20 seconds after Abrakeydabra, as well as the 30 seconds of deaths on the board. They're pretty far behind right now, and they really need Abra to do something wrong in order to come back in the dungeon. And really, they just went for that big pull with Lord and Lady Waycrest, didn't use the Bloodlust, and they went through it just fine. No healing on Lord Waycrest, no deaths, just super clean from them.
That's right, and they do grab a couple extra percent from the kitchen on the side of Method EU, pop their Sky Step potions, pop those Lightfoot potions, get down into the basement, drop their Shadow Melds, and get themselves ready for the similar pull that Abrakeydabra is working on right now, taking on Lord and Lady Waycrest here. And while Method EU does look like they're gaining quite a bit of ground onto this one, because I think it's still going to take quite a bit of time for Abrakeydabra to, once again, kill Gorak Tul, get back upstairs, reset that pull. We've seen a couple times where people are just taking too long to be able to talk to that NPC and get teleported back upstairs. So I think if there's any sort of mistakes onto this one, Method EU can be right back in the driver's seat.
Yeah, I mean, no mistakes further on. They're putting themselves in the position where they can do it, and they're also pulling up the same Lord and Lady Waycrest pull that we just saw Abrakeydabra do. And honestly, I think they're doing it a little bit faster. All the trash is already dead for them, minus one witch that's left there. So they're doing a fantastic job of putting themselves in a position where they have a chance of coming back, as we see Abrakeydabra moving on to just the last phase of Lord Waycrest before Lady comes down.
him. And you're seeing Method EU doing very well, grabbing all of those mobs, taking all of them down. They're almost at 90% trash count, and going into this one, getting the last bit of percent and quickly getting Lord Waycrest out of that pool. And it's always a challenge as well, because you're going to have tons of caster mobs at your disposal, and so many of them that'll take a lot of time. You have to look at the frontal from the boss. You have to look at the cast time from the boss. There's a lot of moments where he just sits there, stands still, and is an absolute pain. So Lady Waycrest dropping to 40% on the side of Method EU, so she is going to be getting closer and closer to spawning.
Yep, and I mean, Lady Waycrest is down for Abrakeydabra. All you really got to do is make sure you're keeping an eye on Tank. Tank takes a lot of damage right now with Lord Waycrest buffed up to, I believe it's 15% extra melee damage, so there's a lot of damage going out right now. You got to make sure you get those interrupts on Lady Waycrest as well. But to be honest, these guys have been doing this for the past 2 weeks. They shouldn't have any problems with interrupts either, so what I'm really looking forward to them having a problem with is this next pull where they pull all of this hallway into Gorak Tul. They have to make sure their healer's in that cubby so they aren't able to get the jump off.
Well, he's not going to be in the cubby since we're running with a Mistweaver monk on this one. He's going to be face first into melee, so it's going to be an extra challenge onto that one, because if anybody moves just outside of that position, or if they do not pull all the mobs for Gorak Tul and any of the shadows that are around him, if they don't pull it right next to that area that he could otherwise jump onto, then you're just going to have somebody get one shot out of that range. So they have to be insanely careful with how they're going to do it. And Smok's out of mana at the moment. They have a couple % left on Lord and Lady, so there's no staff proc available to him. He needs to mana up very quickly, and they need to be able to seal his deal.
See the sugar-crusted fish feast going down so he can regen mana. He's already back to full mana, and they're setting this up for this huge Gloom Horror pull here. And this is probably the most dangerous part of the dungeon for them. You have to use your Bloodlust here. They have it available. I mean, honestly, if they didn't use their Bloodlust available, I'd be questioning what they're doing for their final trash percentage. And we're going to see them just all stack right up to make sure they get these Gloom Horrors nice and stacked so the Unholy DKs can burst them down.
I'm expecting to see the Transcend getting placed down out of Smok and then have him pop Way of the Crane to be able to quickly get in position. I don't know if it's going to be too much of a risk to be able to get in and start popping Way of the Crane to add more damage. I think Smok's seeing that it does look like it's too much of a risk in that end, so he is just standing up there. You're right under that end. I was kind of expecting to have Way of the Crane go up just to be able to more easily deal with them, but you'll probably see it going up right now as he's cleared out the remainder of those Gloom Horrors, and now they just got to deal with the Slavers and the boss.
The Method EU has been so fast to catch up to them in the dungeon.
Honestly, I think at this point, it's going to be really close. Like, if there wasn't that 30 seconds, I'd say Method EU was very far ahead.
I mean, they have to wait for the NPC to get in position to talk to her. They have to run back upstairs, and then they have to engage the trash that they're planning on killing for the last 13% of their trash percentage. With the way Method EU's been playing at the end of this dungeon, the speed at which they're going, they have a chance of winning this.
They really do at this point. I mean, there's a 20%. I actually think Method EU is going to be almost in the lead. The 30 seconds is quite a bit, and they're catching up so much in terms of boss health right now. They're almost equal with their opponents in Abrakeydabra.
I mean, this is the power of Method EU. They have some of the best players in the world. They can put out the most damage, more damage than their peers. These guys are absolutely insane, and they have now passed Abrakeydabra
they're
on the boss.
Absolutely ahead. Method EU has somehow, some way, gotten back into the driver's seat. It's going to take longer than 30 seconds to be able to defeat those, to not only wait for the NPC to come upstairs, but to grab all those mobs, defeat all the shadows on this one. Method EU looks to be in prime position to be able to take this after a catastrophic wipe. Where was Abrakeedabra's failure? It was just a little bit in terms of routing differences, and I think that's going to be what's going to end them.
Yeah, I'm so confused as to what wrong. I don't even think the shadows are worth 13% on their own. They have to pull something else into them, I'm pretty sure, to get rid of it. This is just, I mean, Method EU, I'm so impressed with Method EU right now. Like, they've just been playing so clean in the second half of this time.
Their ability to shake off mistakes, their ability to get past any of this diversity has been such an amazing thing to watch. They did it on Shrine. They're about to do it again. Frag does go down. They need to get that battle res up quickly to seal the deal. 5% left, and once that boss goes down, we will start that 35-second clock and see if Abrakeydabra is going to be able to find some way to get 13% trash. But at this point, I don't think that they're going to be able to do it.
And they'd have to do a massive amount of AoE damage here just to get it done. And we know that Smok procced his staff earlier on in the dungeon, so he doesn't have that many stacks to proc a lot of AoE damage. I just don't see how it's possible. They're going to spend half of that 35 seconds.
And Divine Field misses jump. Divine Field misses jump. He can't go upstairs as quickly. He's got to run all the way around. He's just sitting there walking regular speed, and that is going to be it. Abrakeydabra, they got 20 seconds left to be able to try to grab all these mobs in together. And you're right, they do have to pull into the Hunter's Lodge. I don't think there's any way they're going to be able to take it. Method EU somehow
today, they have been on a tear through the lower bracket. Abrakeydabra needs to come up with a big answer right now. Before we get this one started, BlizzCon, let me hear you make some noise for two of the top dogs.
Method EU squaring off. They're 1-up right now against Abrakeydabra. Both teams picking and fighting their way through the sewers right now. See Boralus is getting into it, and Abrakeydabra facing eliminations. Ironic, and this is going to be a very cool one to see as both of them are getting into the first boss's room and grabbing a whole heap of mobs with them.
Gingy went way ahead of the group. I was expecting to see him set up some pull here, but it looks like he really didn't do much. They're just getting ready to set up to channel their trinkets and go into this massive pull. This is the same pull we saw them do earlier today. They were able to pull it off with no hitches, and there's 2 Emissary of the Tides in here. They can't interrupt anything here. They just need to make sure they AoE down everything before it can hurt them.
That's right, and they dive right in. I mean, Mears instantly pops his Touch of Karma and just dives in head first into all these mobs. So with the Tides Emissary up right now, of course, if 2 of them out there, you're not going to be able to drop any big AoE stuns. It's just all on the healers to be able to heal it up, and they didn't get it to save Divine Fields. Mock going down as well. Bloodlust had just gotten started as this pull is ending in disaster for Abrakeydabra.
These guys are horde in this dungeon. They can't shadow meld the trash off and res up. They have to. I mean, only the rogues can vanish, so Zmok has to instantly release, stealth back to the group to get a res off, and it's going to cost them a ton of time. They committed their Bloodlust to that pull, too.
Really did. I mean, that's just absolute disaster level, and it cost them so much, especially since Divine cannot come back. He cannot walk back, so they need to have Zmok stealth ahead, res Divine Field, get back, and try to be able to do this pull all over again. But their momentum, that mentality is just so painful for them. And right now, Divine, I think he legit did release, so they're going to have some problems here, unless he suddenly got ahead of him.
I mean, at this point, you know, they had a 0-death dungeon in Waycrest Manor, and they still lost the dungeon. You have to kind of wonder where their mentality is going to be at when they wipe on the first pull of the dungeon, and you know Method EU has had a super clean run of this dungeon, and they're not going to make any mistakes. I mean, you have to wonder where their head is right now.
Absolutely, you do. And I mean, now they're just going back, and their routing has been completely scuffed. They're going right back to the start of the dungeon. They have to be able to kill all these mobs, which they never plan on doing, so their routing is already in trouble. They have to figure out where they're making up extra percentage left and right, and this is just what you do not want to see when a team is facing elimination.
But at the same time, and we've talked about this for Method EU a lot this entire tournament, even if you make a mistake right now, even if you have a full team wipe like this, the dungeon isn't over. The other team has the entire dungeon left to make some mistake to let you back in the dungeon. They just have to keep going and have an opportunity here.
I mean, you're against Method EU. They made a mistake.
True.
They made a mistake last game, and they still were able to pull out a victory just to poor optimization of some of the routes onto that one. So at that point, what do you have left at your disposal?
I mean, you have to just push forward and deal with what's in front of you. You can't give up in the lower finals of BlizzCon, man. You have to keep going to try to get into those grand finals. I mean, this is as big as it gets, really.
Now, and it just goes to show how tight the competition can be and how strong some of these teams can be. And looking at, you know, what they're going to be able to pull together. And this is an especially dangerous pull since you have to be able to deal with that Iron Tide Raider. He has that Savage Tempest out, and that is incredibly nasty alongside the hook. So they really want to be able to focus that mob down as quickly as you can.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw some interesting pathing from Method EU earlier today where they pulled trash packs that we normally don't see most team pulls. And they actually decided to skip some of the spotter trash that we usually see teams pull as well. And honestly, it looked great. 0 deaths, they skipped one of the harder parts of the dungeon. And even though it looked questionable based off of what we've seen all season long, the fact of the matter is, usually these teams will come up with better strategies. They'll hold them in their back pocket for a big land like this. And it's great to see them have something just fresh and new prepared for this map.
That's right. Zaylee, of course, getting a couple Sunfires, Moonfires off on it to some of those gutters to the right of them. That way they're going to be able to get that additional trash percentage wrapped up. And of course they have to be able to run it through this little quick gauntlet here, take down any of those powder shots, and get themselves ready with their first spotter.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, this is where the dungeon really begins. The first boss, that trash, I mean, even though they make it as difficult as possible with the massive pull that they do, this is where the dungeon begins. How well you're able to deal with that spotter. Every single time that spotted artillery goes on one of your players, you need to make sure that you're placing those circles in the right direction, because honestly, that circle probably does about 75% of your overall damage in this dungeon, making sure you deal with a lot of mobs. But the problem is the affixes. When all these explosives are spawning at the same time, you have to make sure that you're focusing all of them down, and we saw pretty much the worst case scenario just now. 4 explosives spawn, no problem for Method EU.
That's right. I mean, you even saw the pistol shot as well. It didn't quite crit, so it was like a 1% explosive that he had to run over and kill. He still did it, but it just goes to show how prepared you have to be and how you have to know your assignments to get ready for this.
I mean, these guys seem unfazed. I mean, usually in that scenario where you're kind of like, oh man, explosives help. And I mean, they were able to get it done perfectly. And this is one of those pulls we're talking about. We almost always see this pull skipped. We see, you know, your tank will hop on top of the druid's back and they'll hop across to the bridge and it'll look really cool. Maybe they'll commit some shrouds to it. But no, they just deal with this trash back, even though it has a commander in it, which is something you usually see teams try to avoid because the spotter does no damage to it. They're just going to go ahead and cleave this back down.
So, I don't have to worry about it, and it kind of goes to show how well they're going to be able to do this, and the benefits, for example, of being able to start skipping some of the other mobs ahead. We've seen, for example, how they were able to skip around that Void Emissary as they approach Hadal's alley, and how well they're able to just continue optimizing their routes. They're not having to split their spotter routes as we were seeing previously, where they'd kill Lockwood, keep the spotter alive, do one pull with that spotter, then kill it, then start skipping ahead. They started optimizing it even further by making sure they were grabbing all these mobs, going directly to the boss.
And of course, even though you have this massive AoE pull on top of the boss, the name of the game here, make sure you focus down the boss as much as possible and let the spotter deal with everything else. This boss is phased very tightly. Every single time he gets 100 energy, as you can see on the boss's health bar at the bottom there, they're going to try to let it hop up to the bridge, but you can see the perfect execution. If you ring a piece of the boss and knock her back, she can't disengage to the bridge. That's perfect.
It was great, and they also added Ursul's Vortex to the equation on top of it, so it first knocked her out and then dragged her back into the ring of peace, continued knocking her into the air so that they were able to get an extra 5-10% damage onto it. You love to see this level of optimization from a team like this.
And I mean, really, those Ring of Peace plays are going to, you know, save them an extra phase on the boss. They'll be able to phase this boss one whole intermission sooner, which saves you a large amount of time, something like 30 to 40 seconds, which, you know, when you're this far ahead may not seem like a big deal, but when they don't know they're this far ahead. They can't see where the other team is, so they have to really play to the best of their ability with everything they have, and these guys are doing it.
I think that in many ways they kind of have that internal clock. They start comparing to some other times that you might have seen previously in the future, and they start saying, okay, I know if we play this, if we're executing properly, we're following the usual sort of timings. We're killing the boss around 3 minutes early or something like that. Killing Lockwood at probably around 8.5, something along those lines. That will be much more ahead of other teams. And I think that they're continuing to prove it to themselves when they execute properly.
And we'll see just here, like, I mean, I remember in their first run of the day, they had Captain Lockwood down to like 44%. They got an extra 5% from that Ring of Peace Ursul's combo. And yeah, once again, 43% on the boss. And they were able to phase the boss from 42% to 0 here last time. So I'm assuming they're going to get it again. Just have to deal with this one final intermission phase, and they'll be on to the rest of the dungeon. I mean, Method EU are just trucking through this dungeon right now. We see Abrakeydabra has finally gotten the first boss down, and they're onto that first spotter of the dungeon, but really, they're just kind of hoping for something to happen to Method EU here.
That's what you really have to do when you're facing up against these guys. I like that they ended up killing off that spotter early since they're at 42%. They're getting their latent Arcana trinkets prepared and prepped as Lockwood comes right back down with that shot going towards her, and then they are going to be working to burn her down and guarantee that she does not see another phase.
It's important to mention here too, just small optimizations like leaving the deckhands alive throughout that phase so that the rogues can get a little bit of extra damage from their Azerite traits, just helps them make sure that they phase this boss all the way to 0. It's going to be a little bit closer this time than it was last time, but they should be able to get the boss dead before that yellow energy bar at the bottom fills up, and then we'll move on to the final important section of the dungeon, Hadal's Alley, like we mentioned.
That's right. I mean, if they don't have it, it's going to be a little close here, but they do have Ring of Peace. They have Ursul's Vortex at their disposal, so it shouldn't be a problem at all. Right as she reached 100 energy, they get the kill onto it. Method EU is going strong throughout.
And I mean, this is usually the part of the dungeon we see teams start to use the spotter. I mean, usually we'll see teams something at like 40% trash here, and they'll deal with the spotter through this entire section of the dungeon. They'll leave the spotter alive through Red Captain Lockwood. Method EU, they skip almost all of this trash that we normally see killed by the spotter. This is due to them actually pulling more trash at the start of the dungeon, and they just go straight to the alley that we keep talking about. This is going to be their first massive spotter pull of, I believe, 3 that they plan on doing.
That's right, they're grabbing all those mobs around the Void Emissary, they're grabbing all of the powder shots as well, instantly getting the spotters damage, but it's going to take some time to be able to grab all of them in together. So you're looking to have the tank, or you're looking to have somebody getting targeted by this, or one of the DPS in particular, getting targeted by the spotter, rounding everything up, and this instant damage from all the shots going out from all of them puts tons of stress on the healers. You're going to see all the defensives coming up soon.
And really the only super dangerous part here is making sure your tank doesn't go down, making sure you don't get overrun by explosives. As long as those spotter circles are on top of the entire group, you're going to be 100% fine. But we see Frag dropping incredibly low. He still has the cheat death available, so he still has that available. Not going to go down just yet, and he's able to be healed up by Zalia. But I mean, this is perfect execution of the spotter by them, and they're even managing to get the Demolisher down to half HP too. Just perfect target execution from Method EU.
That's right, they did an incredibly good job on that one, spacing out the defenses when they needed it to make sure they're staying alive. Like, whenever I look at Mirror's cooldowns, I'm always seeing Touch of Karma getting used on cooldown. I'm always seeing whether he's running with Dampen Harm, popping any of these defenders, Fort Brew as well, sorry. Always having these defenses coming up when he needs them, timing them at the right moments just to make sure that he's able to survive these crucial moments right now, and it's so strong. Oh! Looks like he did end up taking one of the circles on that, or he might have gotten meleeed by those Emissary, the Tides, but he's in a safe position right now as they're starting to stabilize and make sure that the last of these mobs getting taken down. I think they just have the other half of Hadal's room, and they're going to do that in probably like 2 pulls.
Yeah, a little bit scary there. They let the Emissary of the Tides out from the Paralyze and Root CC that they use. Usually Mirrors will taunt it out to the side. They'll CC it there and make sure it doesn't come into the group. But it looks like it did get a melee off on him there. But he didn't use the Karma like you were just mentioning. He knew he was fine somehow. I mean, that was fantastic heads-up play to not use it and make sure that he was totally fine, you know, even without using personal cooldowns. But that was definitely a scary moment for them, and it definitely is slowing their setup for what we see them do here. We know, based off of their pull earlier today, they're going to pull the rest of the trash in with Adal, and they're going to cleave it all down. And this is a nasty pull. They even commit their bloodlust to it.
It's very nasty indeed. You're seeing Touch Karma going right up onto the boss right now, so they're expecting all that huge damage to be rolling out of the group. And again, they have that double sap going off for some of those powder shots off in the corner. They're going to pull it in later, but Gingy does go down. Have Battle Res left available for him, but he does lose the bloodlust buff. That is going to hurt them just a bit. They have to watch out for that stacking poison debuff going up onto now right here as the tidal wave is coming through.
Yeah, he did have one of those poison debuffs on him from the Invader as well, so a lot of damage going out on him. They did have the Battle Res available, and they do have one more available should they need it as well, so they're sitting pretty right now on this boss. With the trash going down, all they have left to deal with is the Commander and those charges, and really at that point, it's just a big single target chunk of health, and there's not really a whole lot that can go wrong on Adal.
Yeah, meanwhile, Abrakeydabra, I mean, not to forget, onto them, they're 14% left on Dread Captain Lockwood, and it goes to show they're still just quite a bit behind as Method EU's had almost all of their trash done. They have a couple mobs left remaining that they'll be able to take down, and then they're going to be going on to the final boss.
And this is just, like we mentioned earlier as well, in their first run of Siege of Boralus, this is just perfecting their execution, making sure they're always doing the best thing they can do to get the most single target damage out of their classes. Leaving these snipers up, number one, for the first day we pull, it gets rid of a lot of the random damage that goes on in the group. And also, leaving them till this section of the dungeon, it lets your rogues get a little bit of extra wits about you on single target. They can get a little bit of extra chance to get those double strikes on their single target, do a little bit more damage, and it's just safer in general. So these guys just have an absolute perfect strat in this dungeon.
That's right, and just being able to have that strong execution. Like, look at it. They hit the Ring of Peace to be able to knock it out. Then they run into the Typhoon, and they're constantly just knocking these snipers into an ideal position, making sure that they're getting stunned as often as they possibly can, shutting down any extra damage that Xaylia can keep on pumping when he needs to.
And I mean, seriously, at this point, you kind of have to look forward to what seems inevitable at this point, a grand final between Method EU and Method NA. If I'm Method NA in the back right now, and I'm seeing the form that Method EU has been in the entire day, 3 straight 2-0s for them, I mean, you gotta be wondering, what can we do? How can we improve our game in order to take these guys down? Because they look unstoppable right now.
I don't think Method NA wants any other final than Method EU.
To be honest, I don't think they do either.
You know, I think when they beat them at Sydneyland, they said, okay, we beat them. We want to be able to show that we can continue to beat them no matter how they're playing, whether it's a good day for them, whether it's a bad day for them. We want to be able to show that we're the best. And Method EU on the other side, they said, we're the best onto that one.
And Abrakeydabra, I mean, they're still trucking through the dungeon, but at this point, with the way Method EU is playing, they're just not going to go down. These guys are absolute machines, and Abrakeydabra, you just kind of have to wonder where things went wrong for them. I mean, obviously they wiped to the first pull and they had a couple of mistakes there, but you know, I think the thing with them is we mentioned it so many times in our discussion of the best here. They just kind of have that on and off mentality, and unfortunately, it just looks like they were off today.
Yeah, we talk about their on and off mentality quite a bit, but I also want to talk about their practice level, their commitment level. You know, these are guys that don't give up. We've seen times with a lot of well-known players in either NA or EU communities for Mythic Plus putting together their own teams, competing in the MDI, and then things just kind of fall apart for them. Abrakeydabra has had such resilience through failure, through success, that they are just one of these teams we're always going to be seeing, that we're always going to be looking at as top-level players, no matter what. So Method EU quite a bit ahead. About to start the final boss as Abrakeydabra still clearing out Hadal's room, but Method EU is getting themselves ready to be able to take this game and the series.
And of course, standing between them and a free ticket to the grand finals, Method EU just has to deal with Vickoff, the final boss of Siege of Boralus. And we did see a tiny hiccup from them earlier today on this boss, where on the second platform they didn't quite have enough damage to kill off that second gripping terror, and they ended up spawning a third demolishing terror. Fortunately for them, they spawned right next to each other, so they were able to have now tank both of them. But if that happens again and they don't get the good spawns that they got then, we could see some problems happen here.
I mean, right here we got double demolishing terrors as well, 81 and 95% onto them, but they're still committing and they're still focusing on that gripping terror to be able to bring it down. Gingy, of course, has popped his riposte. He's switching off. They're trading off with Cragg. That way they're going to be able to just kind of redirect some of that aggro, as now is just tanking his demolishing off in the corner, and the rest of the guys are trading off aggro there, trading off ripostes to make sure they bring it down.
And I mean, honestly, that's the best way to deal with it. The only problem I'm seeing is they don't have riposte available for the second platform, which is where they had problems last time. And we saw them commit their trinkets to this. They use those latent arcana, those Ishara's Spawn of Power here. So if they don't have those available for the second platform, I don't see how they're going to get it again. But of course, the main thing here, they're going to make sure they focus down this first demolishing terror, and then they're going to engage the gripping so that they have the best chance to not get the third demolishing terror.
That's right, and it's always based off of when the gripping terror gets in combat with the group. So right as they go onto that second platform, the gripping terror is present, but unless you engage in combat, it won't start that timer for the demolishing. So they make sure they kill that first demolishing, engage with the gripping, get as much damage onto it, and like you said, they're going to need to get very lucky or have to be very careful if they want to continue to commit to the gripping terror when the first demolishing spawns and when the second is. But they have so much damage. The gripping terror is at 20%.
I mean, they're killing it so much faster than they did earlier today. These guys absolutely destroyed that gripping terror. They didn't even come close to getting the third demolishing. All they have to do is single target this down, and they're onto the last platform.
That's right there, and it goes to show, I mean, how they're probably readjusting some of their cooldowns depending on what's present to them. You might say, all right, well, if we're able to use cooldowns on the first one, we commit to that, and then we're going to be able to have cooldowns at the very end, commit to that one as well, and then seal this victory and get on to that grand finals.
And of course, there's full committing on this final platform, as that first demolishing terror that spawns has about triple the health of any other demolishing terror on this fight. So you're going to see these guys go straight for the gripping terror on that back side of the boat. And you see Mira's popping the touch of death, everything coming out from all their DPS players in order to beat the second demolishing terror spawn. And I mean, Method EU has looked fantastic in this dungeon.
They have been fantastic in this dungeon, fantastic in this series. 40% left onto the gripping terror to free the engineer, fix the cannon, and take down Vickoff. No demolishing has spawned, but they do both have the ripostes back. I'd look to one of them to get into melee right now before some of those slams start coming out. I love what we're seeing here. They waited for the initial slam, put out a pistol shot onto it. Oh, it does end up slamming, even though Gingy was in melee onto that one.
But they have all their personals available. They're totally fine. The gripping terror is dead, and when that cannon comes up, we're going to see them going through.
So I gotta watch out for now. He's dropping very low. They get the Dispel off onto him. Zalia was casting Trank. There's double demolishing onto now. They even put the Crucible of Flame into him to add a little bit of extra love. And Vickoff is about to fall. There we go. Second shot's the charm. Method EU taking a 2-0 victory over Abrakeydabra, and the map, game number 1 between Method EU and Method NA. Both going into the left side here, approaching Alunza's room, and we've seen this time and time again, Zyronic. Some big pulls and some big action on this one.
And it's all about making sure you get those snaps perfectly set here, and as long as they do that, this pull's going to be totally fine. But I want to go back to something about JB. I very specifically remember him saying the biggest problem that he always had with Method EU, oh, never mind.
We got another big problem right now.
This is terrible. Getting a Confessor once off his mantle off is the worst thing you can possibly do, because you can't interrupt any casts. It's the same as that Tides Emissary.
There's 2 right now. There's 2, and they're having any of the Juggernauts running all over the place. The entire team dropping very low. Last of the defensives getting used, but the wipe is coming up for Method EU as the last vestiges of the team are getting taken down.
Whereas on the side of Method NA, they totally pulled it off just fine, no deaths. They even have time left on their bloodlust for the next pull, and they've already got the snap prepared. They're just trucking on in the dungeon, whereas Method EU didn't get any of the trash down. They're at 0%. the one saving grace for them is they still have the Bloodlust available.
And they still have their Army of the Dead as well. I think they just knew something was wrong. Something was up, and they just weren't able to execute properly onto that one. And they just decided that they were going to be able to, once that kick went up, they just decided they were going to have that wipe, and then just decided it'd be better to reset.
And of course, I mean, the thing is, we know they're saving their Bloodlust for this Colossus pull because this is something that they really have to make sure that they get perfect single target damage on the Colossus. And you can see Method NA is doing a fantastic job of doing that without the Bloodlust. So these guys, I mean, I said I wasn't too sold on whether or not they were going to be good in Atal'Dazar, but they seem like they're right at home here.
That's right. I mean, and they should be for that matter. I mean, this was one of the early dungeons that they had to go through in order to be in the position that they're in right now. I mean, they were playing it day one against Team D, so it had to be one of those dungeons they would be comfortable with, be ready to be able to play on, and wanted to be able to burn through it as quickly as they could because they wanted that upper seeding position, which they got.
And it looks like they got that Juggernaut a little bit high on the side of Method NA, but they were able to focus single target it down to have the final 3 mobs die at pretty much the exact same time. Exactly what you would want to do in this bolstering setting. Perfect execution from them. And we're going to see them quickly moving on to Priestess Al'ma's room as Method E was just now finishing up that first pull. And it wasn't even the full first pull. They had the 3 mobs CC'd off on the side.
Yeah, they had to split it in half. They still got Bloodlust. They still got a lot of their major cooldowns at their disposal. So I'm kind of surprised that they didn't end up trying to double up a little bit more, whether it was grabbing those 3 mobs or going back into the usual pull. But sometimes if you just don't have enough damage, it poses even greater risks. While Method NA is just getting themselves in prime position to take on Al'Dazar. They delayed the caster, they delayed the entry of the Enchanted Emissary into the group. JB's just sitting out at range, so the Juggernaut will be running over to him, and they'll be able to have stuns to shut him down, and then they'll be ready to go with Priestess Al'Dazar.
And I mean, this isn't exact. I mean, looking at this wipe from Method EU, we've seen them overcome this twice today already. Early wipe into somehow just being so much faster than the other team. But can they do that with Method NA, who's the only team to have beaten them in a series in this tournament? I don't know if it's going to be enough for them. And they're actually opting to completely skip that snap spot that we saw that Method NA pulled. They're not pulling the Colossus at all.
This could be incredibly interesting. I'm wondering where else they're going to be making up for more trash, because the Colossi was one that we were always seeing out of a number of different teams here. And I think it's likely we're going to start looking at both the pack at the bottom of the stairs being pulled in with Priestess Al'Dazar for both teams at some point. But when you're skipping that entire Colossi pack, I'm very curious to see where they're going to make up for the extra percentage.
I mean, that's very curious. I mean, that's pretty much what the emergent best strata come through from Atal'Dazar through this entire year of, you know, cause and effect trials from all these teams practicing Atal'Dazar. I mean, usually what we'll see is teams go to the bottom of the stairs, like you mentioned, pull that pack on top of Al'Dazar because it does percentage boss damage. They don't have to worry about the bolstering, but it looks like Method NA isn't even doing that. And no, they just got it. They just got it. So it's just on stage. They're just going to go ahead and start AoEing this trash pack down while not worrying about boss damage because those transfusion casts are going to deal with the rest of the boss for them.
That's right. They just got to get another 25% of the boss's HP down. It shouldn't be too much of an issue on that end. And by the time they're killing it all off, yeah, there's a lot of damage going out into the group, but as long as that Shrink is going to be able to top everybody off, Lighty's so low right now, 2%. Grievous is stacking up to full. This is full emergency mode for JB right now. They need to be able to stay alive. Priestess Al'Dazar at 3%, but Nerf goes down. Nerf does go down. Lighty goes down. They get the battle res up. They need to taunt Al'Dazar and get her under control. 2 more mobs still left onto the boss. Another death on the side for Shakib, and this Atal'Dazar's getting bloody.
She's
gonna heal! She's gonna heal! Al'Dazar does survive! Nerf goes down! Method EU back in the driver's seat.
Man, that is so unfortunate. I mean, all they had to do was get in the blood pools at the end there, and they would have finished the boss off, even at 2%, and they weren't able to do it. Now they have to go back and deal with the entire boss again, and they have to single target the entire boss because they don't have anything to cleave on top.
If there was any, I didn't think it was possible to have an even more grievous wipe than Method EU had at the beginning, but Method NA just did on that one. This is going to be incredibly tough for them to be able to bounce back from that one. It's a full boss ahead.
I mean, that's worst case scenario. Wiping at a boss at 1%, you lose so much time doing that. And I mean, like you mentioned, even though Method EU had that awful first wipe, they're now back in the driver's seat because Method NA just has to deal with an entire single target boss. Even though this is a fortified setting, the boss doesn't have buffed health, it's just so much time loss. I mean, this is going to be rough for Method NA.
It really will be. I mean, you're still relying on having 2 or 3 transfusion casts going off from Al'Dazar in order to bring her down. That, the added risks, I mean, it just seemed like Nerf decided not to kite, or didn't want to run around, have the honor guards start slaying anybody else from those heroic strikes. Whatever the case was, it is incredibly unfortunate. It's going to cost them quite a bit, and when we look at Method EU, we rarely see them make mistakes more than once.
I mean,
counting on them to be able to make another mistake to give the advantage back to Method NA is going to be a tall order.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, these guys, whenever we've seen them make mistakes in a dungeon, they've literally only done it once, and then they were lights out afterwards. So we know Method NA is going to have something up their sleeve, unless Method EU somehow decides to change the way they've been playing all day. They have to come up with something in this dungeon. They have to have something in their back pocket in order to come back and have a chance of taking this first map.
That's right. I mean, there's going to be some differences out there in terms of the routing as well, since Method EU still has the difference between the Colossi with Method NA. So maybe there's going to be some differences. Maybe there's going to be some more risks. We did see some of our offline matches. If I'm not mistaken, it was Abrakeydabra having some pretty crazy pulls with a Void Emissary near Volcal.
Yeah, on that right side, they pulled a bunch of the Honor Guards on top of a Void Emissary, which is something we never see teams do. I believe the only time we saw it was from 40K, and I believe the 3rd West Cup last season. And when we saw them do it, we were so confused. You don't pull the Honor Guards. They do too much damage. It actually caused a wipe for them or multiple deaths, but they pulled it off just fine at BlizzCon, and the double unholy DKs allow it.
That's true, it really does. And we'll have to look at where they're going to start making those differences, because it is a very open dungeon with a lot of options at our disposal. So Razan going down 10% HP for Method EU, as Method NA got Alunza down, and now they're trying to work on some of these trash mobs, making sure they're going to be in the right position for Razan.
You have to just snap it, doing some of those sword snap pulls that we see so often in this dungeon, making sure they're AoEing on top of that singular point. And of course, they snap the Skyscreamer down to deal with it on Razan, so they're not single targeting the entire time. But you can just see how far behind they are at this point. Even though they have that extra 9% or so trash over Method EU, they have almost an entire boss to deal with.
They do indeed. But that was an incredibly interesting pull that we saw at a Nerf. He grabbed the Skyscreamer, and then as the rest of his team was already waiting below the stairs, somebody placed a flag, a racing flag down, and he was able to charge to it or intervene to it, which then made the Skyscreamer instantly snap into position, rather than having to try to go down the stairs all the way and be susceptible to evading. That was incredible.
I mean, just tiny little optimizations
Here
every
we
single
go.
time. And here's this big pull we were talking about. They're pulling Shield Bearers of Zul, which you don't normally want to pull. And actually, it looks like they're not going to be pulling with the Void Emissary until we just start denying it again. There we go. And this is such a scary pull, but you saw that Honor Guard paralyzed on the side. They're not dealing with that massive AoE damage.
That's right, they skipped both of the Honor Guards in this area. Xaylia used his Ring of Peace in order to split 2 Shield Bearers off from a pack a little bit further down the path, and they brought all of it into that Void Emissary, and they're just absolutely annihilating this trash pack, trying to gain another advantage. We talked about it, we're like, oh, I don't really like this pull when we saw it previously in the end of the regular season, but they've optimized this one to a T.
This reminds me a lot of the original Atal'Dazar strategies, because I remember we had that as one of our time trial dungeons early on, and I remember Dr. J saying, oh, you don't pull any of the Honor Guards, and I mean, this reminds me a lot of those initial strategies, except they're doing it kind of the opposite way. Of course, now what they can do, since they're still in combat with those Honor Guards, should they choose to, they can just run through everything in Shadow Meld, but they're not even going to do that. They're just going to get the rest of their trash count right here. This is what they're going to use to make up that Colossus pull.
They are indeed, and I guess whenever you have so many of these Bulwark of Jujus out, if you have enough crowd controls out at your disposal, they're just kind of picking and choosing. This is like the buffet style for dungeons right now, with Shadow Meld at their disposal, with hard crowd controls from any of the blinds, from any of the paralysis or anything like that. They're able to get in combat with a lot of these mobs, bolster the absolute unholiness out of them, and then just run into Volcal's room, Shadow Meld, and they're totally fine.
I'm pretty sure I just saw one of the DKs control undead one of those Honor Guards. Yep, you can see it right there in the front of the pack. They're using that for a little extra damage on this pack.
It's just another way of controlling it, though, because if they were going to actually take care of it full time, they would need to make sure that it doesn't ever get bolstered. So they're probably going to let it go, let it do its own thing. He's sending it away right now. That way they can run away, drop their control of it, and then Shadow Meld.
I mean, yeah, it's just a little bit of extra damage for them. That thing does so much damage. But I guess it wasn't actually procced. It wasn't doing its massive AoE damage. It's just, like you mentioned, an extra way for them to crowd control it. But the Shadow Meld comes in. They're onto Volcal, the 3rd boss of the dungeon for Method EU. And these guys, I mean, it's a new strategy we've seen. It's a new pathing, but it looks like they're pulling it off perfectly.
They really are. But keep in mind, let's not count out Method NA just yet, because they are equal in terms of trash percentage, and they're taking on even more right now, as they do have Bloodlust at their disposal as they're getting closer to Volcal's side. But keep in mind, Nerf's dropping really low. We're going to have to keep an eye on him here, as that Skyscreamer does get paired up with a number of those Saurons, and he does go down. It looks like Method NA might be having another wipe right now.
I mean, this is just worst case scenario for them. 2 full team wipes in the first map of a series. You got to keep your mentality in check here. That's really all I can think for them right now, because in their minds, with 2 full team wipes against Method EU, a team that's been so consistent all day, there's no way you're winning this dungeon. But they just have to keep going through the motions, just on that off chance that something's going wrong.
I think if they're able to pull some larger setups, they would have been able to get back into a more favorable position, because the death differential wasn't that bad. But having the crowd control break on that Sky Screamer was just so debilitating for the team. And it looks like somehow they did end up getting the Emissary of the Tides. Okay, it was on purpose that they got the Emissary of the Tides onto the group. So the setup was just broken because of the fact that they did not crowd control the Sky Screamer properly. They ended up trying to put the paralysis onto the Sky Screamer before the Tide's Emissary was in and away from it. The CC broke, Sky Screamer snapped into position, AoE'd everybody and feared them.
Second time the charm for them, they pull that same trash pull that they just wiped on. Looks like everything's going just fine for them this time around. Meanwhile, Method EU, you know, while we've been talking about Method NA, Method EU has just kind of dealt with the entire third boss of the dungeon. They've got Volcall down to 20%. Now, usually at this point, teams have finished off all of their trash percentage, but Method EU still has to deal with a bunch of the dungeon.
They really do at this point, and they're going to be another boss behind as they're grabbing a ton of Sky Screamers. We'll see if they're pulling the full 5 that we saw earlier and start having those hibernate spam we saw out of the Druids, just making it so they can completely shut down one more mob and make everybody's life a little bit easier.
Looks like they're only going for 4, it seems. The hibernate theme, I've really only ever seen Buff War Nerf Rogue do that, and of course they did it again here, but you know, denying your Druid the damage there, I'm not quite sure that's 100% the best strategy, but man, it does look flashy when they do it.
It really does look flashy, and you're right. It does take up a lot of extra activity time. You have to make sure nobody's taking any other kind of damage, and it's sort of an odd and too much of a scalpel, too fancy of a pull to be very consistent.
Yeah, a little bit too glowy-brained, I think. But yeah, Method EU, they're probably just going to go straight through the rest of the trash that we just saw Method NA deal with as they now head up to Volcall, while both teams are dealing with the same trash pack at the same time, just from different directions here. How about that?
That's right, but 1 boss difference, 6 death difference as well. Zelia dropping pretty low, and they've been dealing very well with Grievous from what we've been seeing so far.
I mean, and he does have that staff proc available in about 30 seconds there, but I mean, he's not going to have any major time to actually build up any stacks. It's not going to be that big of an issue for them. So, you know, Method EU, they're looking good after that wipe again. It looks like they're going to get away with it for a 3rd time today.
It really, I mean, but
with some help from Method
fair,
NA.
Yeah, I was going to say, to be fair, it was off the back of some wipes from Method NA. Some of the other series that we saw, it was just like, oh, the team had like 1 death, or they got a little bit slower pulls. Their routing wasn't as good, and then Method EU was able to capitalize. But here, they are firmly in the driver's seat as they even grab the Emissary of the Tides, and they do still have that Sky Screamer. Okay, who's crowd control just behind it. So, sorry, it is parried. They're not in combat with it, and they don't have to worry.
It's just out of range of the Emissary of the Tides. I believe it's about a 10-yard range, so they have plenty of time, plenty of room there to make sure they're not dealing with any of that. They still do need to deal with, I believe, 1 more Sky Screamer just to finish off their trash percentage. They'll probably end up doing that after the boss or with the boss just to finish it off for their last percentage. But we see Method EU moving up to the final boss of the dungeon in a commanding position.
They really are on this one. And for a dungeon that started with disaster, they are in a prime position to be able to take a game number 1, which we were talking about how important it is for both of these teams to be able to get an early lead and an early advantage, and making sure when you're in the grand finals, you're not letting any nerves get into you.
Yeah, but the question for me is, where's that extra 2.5 percentage coming from? Are they going to go down afterwards to deal with it? Oh, I mean, oh, there it is right now. It just now come up. Hey, there it is. Hey.
He had to walk a little bit of ways, all right, but he made the journey.
But the question is, they're going to have to CC it off on the side, because what they don't want to happen is they don't want to kill it while the boss is still in a high percentage. This is a bolstering dungeon, and you don't want to bolster a boss, give it that much extra HP. So either they're just going to not cleave it at all, and they're going to go ahead and cleave, move around with it in the group just to get a little bit of extra passive cleave on it, which looks like what they're doing. Normally we'd see teams just opt to CC that off on the side, but they're just so confident in their strategy that they're going to leave it in the group.
I mean, at this point, they might as well. I mean, there's too many risks at this point when they've got the game well in hand, and they just need to make sure, hey, we're not offering any extra damage that we shouldn't be dealing to it. Staying well to keep everybody up together and making sure the kicks are everything that we need. And I love the control out of both of these Unholy DKs. You have the grips, you have a longer range on your kick, and you even have the pet kick as well that you can start taking advantage of if you really needed it on top. And Method EU, despite that early wipe, just like the wipes that we've seen in 2 other series beforehand, they're able to shake it off and they're able to bounce back.
And I mean, Method EU, the second this boss and this Skyscraper go down, are going to be taking game 1 of the series. There's absolutely nothing that could possibly go wrong for them.
The Zyronic curse onto that one. 3% left onto Yasma. The Skyscreamer has gone down, and so has Yasma. Game number 1 going to Method EU.
Final and pull down the first championship at a BlizzCon.
Let's dive right in, Zyronic. The Method v Method matchup right now as EU has a 1-game lead. Both tanks getting into their snap spots, getting into position to be able to wrap up a very large pull.
The first thing I noticed here when I look at both these team comps, they're both running Resto Druids instead of Mistweaver Monks. Usually we see the Mistweaver come out when you run the double Unholy DK, but the main thing to look at here, this is a raging dungeon. They need to have access to Soothe for this dungeon.
They really do, and I think on top of that, there's not too much group-wide damage that'll go out. A lot of times it's going to be single target in their focus. Yeah, you'll have like some Tempest or some AoE type of cast go out from some of the guards, for example, but in general, you're not having large-scale group-wide damage like you see out of like a Waycrest, maybe an Underrot, something along those lines. So Way of the Crane does have value, but it's not nearly as important to be able to sustain everybody through a rough pull.
This was a problem point for Method EU earlier today in this Shrine of the Storm. They had a full wipe on this first boss here. Let's see if they're able to, learn from their mistakes and have a clean pull here. Whereas North America, they've been actually going a lot faster. Their first pull, they finished about 15 seconds faster than Method EU, and they're looking great in this dungeon so far.
JB and his squad getting all the mobs in together on the right side of your screen here, as we are seeing now on the left. Grabbing everything else around him as Bloodlust goes up for both teams as they pull together some mass pulls to help boost up that DK damage.
I mean, you can see the 1.4 million burst coming from Shakib there. Just the power of the Unholy DK. You pop those blisters, you get a bunch of strength, single target damage comes out. Aquazer's already down to sub 80% for Method NA. Method EU's not having that great of a time with this AoE pull though, and these mobs are starting to get into that raging area.
Yeah, very scary at this point as you're going to start seeing a lot more casts going off. They're going to have to deal with that Templar and make sure they're not going to be having any of the protection buffs getting up. If they do, I think they did, and Xaylia actually ended up taunting the Templar, but he needs now to taunt it back right now because it has enraged. He got the Soothe off. You need to be able to get it back into the pack so that way they can clean it down.
I mean, this is a lot scarier for Method EU than it is for Method NA. They still have Raging Spiritualists sitting there, just hitting those anchors out, making do a lot of damage to the group. This is not clean at all for Method EU, but Method NA is about to get into the transition phase a lot faster than Method EU is, and they're looking good in this dungeon so far.
They are. They do have Windspeaker Heldis pulled as well, and you'll see very light cleave damage going on to that mob. Again, dealing with the enraged effect, if they had any other ads out, if they're having any other stressors going on, it's very important to make sure they get that Soothe off immediately from the rest of Druid here, as they do have that transition phase right now on the side of Method NA, as EU is just a little bit behind.
And looking on to the last part of the dungeon here, as they both deal with these massive pulls, the biggest time save in this entire dungeon is going to be that one phase on the final boss that we talked about. We already saw Method EU pull it off, and now I know Lighty, I know Shakib, I've talked to them a lot. The entire second half of the MDI season, we didn't see a single team pull off a one phase of that final boss. We just now saw Method EU pull it off, so now I can finally kind of leak the fact that Method NA, they can do it too. They're very confident in their strategy to be able to one phase the boss, so really, if both teams can pull it off, it's about how they execute in the rest of the dungeon here.
That's right, and then we will see how that execution, we saw a little bit on the off-broadcast matches as well, to be able to see how well they were able to one phase and just pump so much damage into it. But they got to get there first, as there's a couple Aqualings left on the side of Method NA. Bringing those down, and they'll enter the final phase.
And I mean, this is just a clean execution from Method NA. They're not worrying about focusing the Aqualings down. They've kind of cleaved them all down pretty evenly. And of course, what's going to happen now is that boss is going to spawn about 15%. They're going to use the haste buff from Heldis to finish that off, no problem. And I mean, they're just going so much faster than Method EU. We've been saying it all the time, but man, they're looking really impressive right now, bouncing back from that Atal'Dazar.
That's right, slight difference in terms of overall trash percentage here. But Method NA definitely does have that lead, but there's a lot of ground to make up in particular because we have to deal with a necrotic, keeping that in mind, how dense of trash mobs they have to deal with going into the second boss's room. And we've also seen a number of times where that bridge skip with the Guardian Elemental has gone awry.
Oh, I mean, I think that's the #1 white point we've seen out of any dungeon this entire year, is just not getting the Shadow Meld skill properly on that bridge. We did see it pulled off perfectly by Method EU earlier today, and I would hope that Method has been practicing enough to get it done cleanly too. What I'm interested in is how they plan on doing this trash back in the hallway. I believe we saw, I want to say Games Revolted go down here and pull literally everything and have it pulled off perfectly with that AoE CC. Problem is they had a Ring of Peace available so that they didn't have any extra, problems inside of that safe zone that Runecarver's Horn gives you. They do have Ursul's Cyclone available for them, but I don't think that's as useful as the Ring of Peace here.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, they have to keep in mind you'll have Ursul's Vortex, but you will also have Typhoon, so you're getting a close enough effect to be able to make up for it right there. And with Snap Spots being so popular and so powerful, I think it's very likely that they shouldn't have too great of an issue going into this one, as Method EU pulling quite a bit of mobs all the way back to get into the group, while Method NA does pull Runecarver's Thorn and is grabbing all the mobs just outside that Guardian Elemental.
And the time it took us to speculate about Ring of Peace versus Ursul's Vortex, they said, you know what, we're just going to kill it anyways. We're going to use the double unholy DKs. Just do 1,000,000 damage between the two of them, no problem. Take care of it. And then, of course, they can also bring the trash from the start of the bridge for a little bit of that extra trash percentage that's going to catch them up to where Method EU is.
That's right, and at this point, we are seeing equal in terms of trash percentage. There's a little bit more that's going to fall for Method NA in just a moment. We'll start looking at whether or not they're going to skip the entirety of the bridge. Looks like they are at this point. They're taunting the Guardian Elemental in. Everybody's going to get back, and you're going to see the big leap out of Now. Make sure he gets his Shadow Meld off right at the last second. Although Mears does have that debuff, will be ticking quite hard, and they need to make sure he's out of combat before they dispel him.
One skip down perfectly for Method EU. Now we get to see if Method NA is able to pull it off. And it's honestly going to be a lot easier for them because they dealt with the trash in front of the bridge. And actually looks like they're going to go for the easy version where they have the Rogue pull the Guardian Elemental. They can just be completely out of combat here. Don't even have to commit their Shadow Melds to this. Yoda's going to go ahead and pop the Riposte and the Cloak and then chain hook to the rest of the group by vanishing, and it's going to be a perfect execution for them. We did, however, on the side of Method EU, while we were talking about that skip, see Mira's go down, and they did use their one and only available Battle Res on him.
It's definitely an easier way, but I feel like it's also just a little bit slower as well. So I'm curious as to where they're going to start using Shadow Melds instead, because they do have a number of them that are available to them as they're grabbing all of these initiates and pulling them all into the boss. Previously, we were seeing they split up this pull from other teams, but not for Method NA. They're going all into the boss. 1.5 million damage coming out here from Shaquem.
And I mean, on the other side, we also see Genji going down on this pull. They don't have a battle res for him. This is going to cost them a lot of time as they finish off this pull. They'll be able to manually res him afterwards, but that's another 10 seconds on the board in terms of time that they could be using to set up the next pull into the boss. And Method NA, once again, with a clean dungeon run so far, and dealing with this trash on top of the boss as well, they're looking so good.
That's right, and this is what we kind of want to see if we're talking about little mistakes that can start throwing the game in a big way. We saw large-scale wipes that should have been the end of some of these teams, but Method EU is able to bounce back. Having a couple extra seconds, it's got to be really nice for the side of Method NA, since they are a little bit ahead on trash. Method EU will catch up in just a moment, but the lead on the boss is very significant.
And of course, the strategy that they're pulling off right now is something that's only become as prevalent in the past few months. We saw it first shown off in the eastern region, but by jumping up on this rock, you can avoid the major, pain of this part of the fight, which is those tornadoes that circle the area. All you have to do is move the boss back and forth so it's not inside that protection circle, and then you can stand up there and avoid everything by cleaving down the bosses. This is a new strategy. It's something that we don't really see too often outside of mainly the best teams, and it's something that really makes this fight a lot easier to do. The thing to look at here is what both these teams do in terms of boss percentage, which bosses they focus down. Method NA goes for a cleave style where they cleave them down evenly, whereas Method EU likes to focus down Gilcaller Faye and then pull more trash in on top of Brother Ironhole later on.
I like how you mentioned that in particular, how well they're going to be able to bring those certain mobs in. They're going to add anything else on top of it. And look at it right now, 6% difference in terms of trash at their disposal, as I believe they pulled all of the initiates downstairs, so I don't think they have anything else left to pull. But also looking at how well these teams are manipulating in the movement for Galecaller Faye in particular, making sure she's not lingering too long in that defensive field, because it does drop all the dots.
And that's really weird that they actually set themselves with something with nothing to pull, because otherwise you're just going to be single targeting Brother Ironhole down from 40%, which is not really efficient, not what's going to get you back into this dungeon. I mean, they've got Galecaller at 20, but Method NA has both of the bosses at 20%. They're a solid 40% on Brother Ironhole ahead right now, and I mean, we've said it the entire dungeon, but if they're able to one-phase that final boss, they have to have multiple full wipes in order for Method EU to come back in the dungeon.
Yeah, okay.
maybe that's a little over the top, but
yeah.
I mean, the way they're playing right now, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, true. And we'll have to look at, where we start looking at the variants in particular, because if it was, I believe we saw it out of Method EU when they were playing off against Games Revolted, if I'm not mistaken, where they had that massive pull up onto the bridge. They were grabbing every single caster pack and bringing it in with the tentacles. And looking at the execution of that one in particular, and we've also seen a number of different times where healers are going down, unfortunately, on the last boss, Bull Zip. So there's a lot of other potholes in this road, you know?
I mean, that's really kind of the... Oh, look what they're pulling here. They're just going to decide to pull this back on top of the boss.
I was wondering, I was like, there has to be something else going on at this point. And here they go. They're grabbing, I believe it's 2 or 3 enforcers along with the ritualist here. Be able to grab everything in together and cleave it down with Brother Ironhall. I like this a lot. And dare say I probably like this even more than cleaving them both down equally.
Well, the thing is, they have to make up for the extra trash percentage that Method NA pulled. They have to get to that 67% marker so that when they do pull the trash on the bridge, they're at what they need to finish off the rest of the dungeon. I'm interested to see if Method NA is going to pull off this dungeon. Unfortunately, since Nerf is a dwarf, he did have to die during the skip. He doesn't have Shadow Mode available, so they're going to have to res him up. But once they're done with that, they can get setting up for this bridge pull.
All right, and they get themselves into position for the bridge pull. And also, it kind of works out as you will be able to see Yoda run ahead. He will be able to pop his tricks, get a little bit of threat to the transferred over to Nerf, and then they'll be able to start pulling this pack away.
And I mean, they had to wait a lot there because once again, Nerf was on his mount there. You can't be tricked when you're on a mount. So Yoda had to wait until Nerf caught up to the group. So they did lose a bit of time there, but Yoda was able to set up the trash packs to where they were close enough to where he could just tricks both of the patrolling packs into Nerf. They have all 3 stacked up except for one of those Deathbringers in the back, but they get the interrupt off on it. It should join the group. And that's the one mob that I'm looking at, that Deathbringer in the back. Once it's in the group, they'll be fine. But man, that took them a long time to get dealt with. And it looks like Nerf got
stun
hit by
goes
the
up on the
frontal.
tank. Nerf is stunned right now. He's not able to recover. Lighty goes down, and we're going to be having a full team wipe coming up on the side of Method NA. And right as all those mobs are enraging, Method EU is just about to pull off this very same pull. If they're able to do this successfully, they are far and away going to be taking this.
I mean, I never thought we would see a tank get hit by that frontal ability. We talked about it all year long. You get hit by that frontal, you get stunned for 6 seconds. You can't be removed from that. You can't do anything for 6 seconds. That frontal hits hard as well, the mental assault. And it just causes a full team wipe for them.
They had the damage. They were able to clean it up without an issue. Method EU, even after sustaining a couple deaths, despite being a little bit behind their opponents, they are now firmly in the lead and well positioned to be able to take down Lord Stormsong.
And if I'm not mistaken, they actually don't need to deal with both of these packs here. They can only clear one side if they want to. So they're in a very pretty position after, Method NA was looking great the entire dungeon, but that one wipe is pretty much going to cost them. And the problem here is in this Shrine of the Storm, the checkpoints are awful in this dungeon. If you wipe anywhere before the 3rd boss, you have to go all the way back to the start. And they didn't even clear the trash pack that opens up the skip, so they have to run through the entire dungeon.
Yeah, there is one mob that you're going to be able to kill that will offer a bit of a shortcut on that end, but it's so inconveniently placed that if you do not take it down, then you're running all the way back. So they're running past multiple Void Emissaries, multiple different mobs with True Sight, and then they're going to be able to run past a number of other mobs with True Sight that will chase after them in order to be able to Shadow Meld and then be able to res their tank. I'm not quite sure if they're going to be able to do this, and if they do, it's just going to eat up so much time and further Method EU's lead.
I mean, we saw it happen to the teams. We saw it happen to Games Revolted against Method EU. They were so far ahead in the dungeon, but then they had some problems on the final boss, which let Method EU take the lead. We would need to see something of a similar caliber happen to Method EU for Method NA to come back in this dungeon.
We really will on this one. 65% left for Lord Stormsong for Method EU, as they've done well to get some immunities up when they needed it to avoid getting mind controlled in that end. And it's been so helpful for this team to help boost their single target in a very big way and make sure that they have orbs banked up and ready to go when they need them.
And if I'm not mistaken, Zaylia still have his stacks saved up for the entire dungeon. He hasn't gone down this dungeon. He's going to have a massive amount of burst damage on the final boss to help them single phase that. I don't think he's going to want to use that to clear out the eels. He wants to let his DKs go ahead and stack up their Festermite stacks, get a bunch of strength for that single target damage. But he will be able to, do a cool 1 million or 2 damage to the boss with the staff.
I think if they time it properly, they will be able to have it proc right as the phase is about to transition. It might end up killing him if he's killing some of the manifestations of the deep at the same time. But if he does have all the trash completed and they do end up killing the boss at that same moment, it will be worth.
And we're seeing perfect execution on Lord Stormsong from Method EU. They're just going ahead and letting these void orbs just trail behind them. They're using just the perfect amount so they don't get any stuns off. And, I mean, the kicks as well, they're just playing absolutely perfectly right now. Once again, small hiccup from Method EU, but you know, mistakes from the other team let Method EU back into the dungeon, and, you know, once they make a mistake, they don't make anymore.
That's right. Method NA going again for their second attempt onto this large pull. They need to be able to have those stuns. They need to be able to have that Typhoon into Ursul's Vortex, be able to make sure they lock these mobs down, especially when they're enraging.
Yeah, and I mean, the big thing here, I think even with the enrages, if the tank doesn't get hit by the frontal there, you have a chance of finishing off the pull because he's able to heal himself out. You can see him dropping incredibly low there, even without getting hit by the frontal. Just goes to show how dangerous this pack is once they get into that raging. But the second time around, they're able to deal with it and move on to the third boss in the dungeon. But Method U's already gotten that down and moving their way to the final platform.
That's right, and we do still have to see Method NA taking on one of the packs on the sides. They still have to kill some of those lashers, then be able to pull the boss. So Method EU's got another 3-4 minute difference, I would say, in terms of speed over their opponents.
Man, I mean, they're just, it's so uncanny how Method EU is playing in this tournament. We're not used to seeing any mistakes from them, but to see them have those mistakes like they did, even in the Sydney LAN, and then come back and just stay strong through the mistakes, it shows great, I don't know what to say. These guys, that poise from the team,
yep.
they've improved so much from Sydney.
And I think that really goes to show how this MDI is really ideal of what we wanted to be able to see. It's ideal because it's not ideal. We're not having every single run be perfect. We're not having every single little bit of execution be flawless onto this. We're seeing those honest mistakes and what these teams need to do in order to recover from those mistakes. Volzith getting pulled on the side of Method EU along with 2 eel packs, and they've been obliterated here by Mr. November, Mr. Sweden right now, as Fragments goes up in that 500, 600k DPS as Volzith is getting ready to transition.
And they're at the same percentage they were at. They're actually lower than they were when they one-phased the boss before. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's one of those things where you look at it and it doesn't happen. Because we blinked and they had the boss dead. And the boss is at like 60 energy or so. They still had so much time left to finish off the boss.
But their big burst is going to be on the second round on that end. Because they want to make sure that Zalia's got a fully stacked 9 buff before they start popping everything at their disposal to get the boss as low as possible. Because I remember, we talked about this where I think it was against Games Revolted. Games Revolted got it lower, but Method EU had better burst when they came back upstairs. They had all the resources that they needed in order to bring the boss very low.
Yeah, and I mean, also Method EU also goes for the typical strategy we've seen in Shrine of the Storm from most teams this entire season, where they play safe, they deal with the denizens beforehand, and then they get perfectly set up for the boss. So that might also help them with their single target damage a bit, which is not what we saw from Games Revolted.
That's right, they're getting everything back available to them. The double kicks are going to be going out as well. Very even cleave coming out from the team here. It's going to be kind of scary as well because they're going to want to make sure they get that soothe out onto the sunken denizen very early. But I guess they don't really have to worry too much about these Forgottens as long as their kicks are going to be good.
And no, your eyes are not deceiving you. That is a Resto Druid doing more damage than the Outlaw Rogue on this pull. With that 90% damage buff, they're doing so much damage with the buff here. I mean, that's one of the other things that deals with the boss for them. We're going to see them pull these final eel packs into the boss, let the Unholy DKs do their thing. The armies are going to come out, the Bloodlust is going to be popped, and I'm ready to see Method EU one-phase this boss again.
Oh, I'm ready as well. Zalia putting up a very good position, very far away from any of those eels. He doesn't want any of them touching him, as it will be dropping him very low since he only has 10% of his regular HP, thanks to that 180% damage buff that he gets from that boss. So 40% right now for Volzith, as he's barely at 40% in energy, and this boss is just getting obliterated right now. 15 seconds left on Bloodlust, 20% left on the boss.
There's no way. This is getting one-faced again. These guys are just melting him like butter. There's nothing between them and the end of the dungeon. With Volzith going down, Method EU is going to be up 2-0 in this series.
Right, the last percent goes down. Method EU solidly taking that Shrine of the Storm, going up in the series 2-0. Team in Method NA, that's got to be the one. And right now, we're already seeing the differences. We're seeing Mistweaver and Arrested Druid coming up onto this one. Both teams dropping their shrouds and moving into this more industrial wing.
And I've got my eyes peeled on what Method EU is doing. The strategy that we're talking about them pulling off is this strategy where they do a smaller pull at the start of the dungeon, and they do no Peacekeepers for the first pull, and then afterwards they go for a massive 7 Peacekeeper pull, and it looks like they're sticking with this strategy. They've got the mech jockeys CC'd off on the side so that they can turn into Peacekeepers later on, and they think their strategy is good here. I mean, the biggest problem with this is the mobs tend to keep they're too spread out for the DKs to actually do their unholy DK damage, whereas for Method NA, they go for the more typical strategy. 5 Peacekeepers this pull, 3 or 4 next pull. They keep it simple.
We'll have to see as we go into it. I mean, Method NA has already popped Bloodlust. They do have 3 or 4 Peacekeepers into the pile right now, but it's also, keep in mind, it's Sanguine going out right here, and it's very, very dangerous having those Peacekeepers, and having any extra healing going on to them can completely mess up your run. So 11% on trash right here for Method EU as they're grabbing all the Peacekeepers. They're all getting activated, and we're going to have a massive mountain of mechs here in a moment.
And we're going to see now kiting a lot because he doesn't want to be anywhere near them. Those charge claws go off on him, he is instantly dead. And the thing is here, I mean, like we mentioned, they have to get them stacked up quickly. The Bloodlust is coming out for them, and I mean, we're going to have to see what these Unholy DKs can do if they're stacked up. Right now, it's not looking so hot for them.
I mean, Gingy's a power lifter, but right now is a cross-country runner right here. With all the kiting that's required for these guys, there's so many mobs he's trying to be able to rally together. So much damage going to be going out onto him, and while he's got both his defensives in Last Stand and Shield Wall available, it's very important that he's going to be able to kite these in a proper fashion and only take as much damage as he needs to.
And the important thing to look at here is the size of these 2 pulls between the 2 teams. They both end up coming out to the exact same trash count, 45% after the 2 pulls. But with the way Method NA is pulling, as long as they're dealing with their Sanguine, their strategy is almost always going to come out on top in the way these 2 teams have been playing. So got to keep an eye on the Sanguine placement. I think that was the slowest I've ever seen Method NA do that pull.
It was slow, and now has been yo-yoing in HP consistently so many times. It looked like he was just about to die before Zalia was able to recover for him and help him out in a very big way. And you're seeing Last Stand and Shield Wall have both been used. We don't have Commanding Shout on cooldown just yet here, but sorry, Rallying Cry on cooldown just yet here. But again, all this kiting, like you mentioned, it takes up a lot of time. Look at how spread out all of these mobs are right now. You have 2 Peacekeepers that are getting no cleave damage whatsoever. Whereas Method NA on the right side, they're always getting some kind of extra damage, whether it's onto thugs, other mech jockeys, or just the Peacekeepers themselves to make sure that they are dying when they need to.
And I mean, the other thing to look at here is because they're so spread out, he now also needs to make sure he's not kiting anything through Sanguine. This is an incredibly difficult situation to put your tank in, and you can just see why it's taking them so long to finish this off. I mean, that Peacekeeper could have gotten a tick of Sanguine off if they killed it 2 seconds later. This is just really, really dangerous. But honestly, the way I see them pulling off this pull right now, this is the best they've done this from what we've seen from Method EU so far.
I would agree on this one. They've done a much better job rallying these mobs together right at the end, but Method NA's strategy, I think, as you mentioned, is still holding up to be more superior here as they're getting another round of Peacekeepers out. They're grabbing a ton of mobs in together. They're already working on the 40+%.
Yep, and this is I believe this is the last pull they're going to do before that first boss, whereas Method EU decides to pull their next trash back into the boss. And this is interesting because this is, like we mentioned, this is the fastest we've seen Method EU pull this off so far, and we're just going to have to see if it's enough to put them ahead of Method NA. They usually pull the boss, I would say, about 30 seconds to a minute before Method NA, but Method NA, just with the extra trash percentage that they get at the start of this dungeon, they almost always pull ahead.
We're seeing them getting themselves ready as they do pull that enchanted emissary. They've got another mech coming into view in just a moment. But I believe they stopped and they zapped that mech jockey over there, so they're going to get him into that next Peacekeeper in just a moment if they are not dropping any combat with it. Good job on to that enchanted emissary as well, making sure they had enough slows at their disposal.
And unfortunately right now there's a Peacekeeper just sitting in Sanguine. It has healed completely to full HP, and that is the worst case scenario. Those have more HP than every other mob in the instance. They're going to have to chew through everything they just dealt with on that. But I want to mention as well, for Method EU, this is a completely different strategy. We usually see them go to the boss before. They've checked out those VODs from the matches yesterday. They've changed their strategy to try to make it better, and this looks like it's something that's working out for them.
They're going to the boss onto this one. They might be delaying that just a little bit, but keep in mind, even though one Peacekeeper was around 60-70, healed up to full, they had already pulled another Peacekeeper out on top of it, so at this point, if they're already 2 full health Peacekeepers, they might as well grab him, bring him into the boss, and let's get busy with the coin-operated crowd pummeler.
And, I mean, this is where they have a chance to get ahead in the dungeon. We know Method NA is going to deal with this final pack, and then they're going to move on to the boss. But, I mean, they're not... Method EU didn't pull the boss that far before when Method NA is pulling it. And we also know that Method NA, they deal with that extractor pull right afterwards as well. So it's actually a lot closer than I thought it was going to be with the way Method EU is pulling.
Yeah, these are the key adjustments that we want to look at. And when you're a team like Method EU who's preparing for the Grand Finals, you're preparing for all of these games, you're going to look at, all right, where do we lose if we lost in a straight head-to-head match where nobody's making mistakes? We fight them again, we play against them again. We need to make adjustments in order to make this work. And I love being able to see a lot of these mechanized Peacekeepers getting dragged into the boss because, again, with how much kiting you have to do anyway for the coin-operated crowd pummeler, it kind of just works out.
And then something else to mention here, of course, as well, because of the amount of trash that Method EU has pulled here, they have to make sure they're dealing with all this. Their tank has to kite around way more than Method NA's does. So because of that, Method NA is able to get a lot more boss damage out there. They're a lot more comfortable in this position, but at the same time, Method EU gets a lot more trash percentage out of it. Just more trade-offs here. But right now, to me, it seems like Method EU is just ever so slightly in the lead.
I would still say so. I mean, yes, there is a lot of movement going out onto it, but I think that only really starts affecting your healer in many cases. But if you're actually having that Mystic Touch buff up onto all the enemy mobs, you know, your healer's already still kind of working for you at that point. And you're also not able to get that much uptime for your Rested Druid in melee because they have to be running out and taking care of all of the different foot bombs out there anyway. So it's already a lot of responsibilities for the healer, so I don't think it impairs them too much. I do think Azalea is going to proc his staff in a moment here. Might see if he has just enough time to be able to eke out the kill onto these guys before he's able to drop and get some mana back.
Yeah, a little bit of a spooky moment for now there, but we saw the Life Cocoon come out to go ahead and keep him nice and healthy. And of course, they decided to go ahead and cleave these Peacekeepers down once the coin-operated crowd pummeler was dead. So number one, they get the checkpoint available for them, but number two, they don't have to worry about any Sanguine spawning under the boss, because that boss sometimes like to stand in place and cast some abilities instead of moving around. And if a boss gets Sanguine healed by 2 or 3 ticks, you're really unhappy with that.
You're in very big trouble, and at this point they do have to cleave down the remaining Peacekeepers before they're able to engage with their next pull. But I think it's, what, 4 or 5% for any of these Peacekeepers when you have a mech jockey inside. So right there, the 62%, they are in a dead heat. Method NA just slightly ahead, but that's just hairs of seconds.
I mean, the efficiency of dealing with a smaller amount of trash bombs on top of the boss just propelled them ahead in here. When they finished the boss, they were ready to move on ahead. Method EU still had to deal with those 3 Peacekeepers, and we're seeing massive pulls of equal size from both teams here. It looks like Method NA is going for the bigger pull with everything just on top of these extractors. This is scary.
Hey,
look at the DKs.
It's incredibly scary onto that one. I'd love to be able to have a way of the crane to be able to help out these DKs because of the damage they're dealing, and might even be some of the aggro that they be generating of how much these unholy DKs can absolutely pump into those mobs. That double extractor pull can be quite deadly, but Method EU on the other side, they're no stranger to the danger. At this point, they are also taking down another hefty pack and getting themselves recovered.
And of course, once they deal with these extractors, they're going to go ahead and leave the gnomes behind that are inside because they don't want to deal with those. They don't give any trash count. They're not something you want to deal with. So they're going to run up to Azeroth. They're going to shadow meld everything off, and they're going to go ahead and start pulling the second boss. And we see the same pull now coming out from Method EU with this nasty extractor pull. It just gives so much trash percentage.
And this is one of the kind of like the cubbies that nobody really ends up going to because everyone's so bent on following the rails of the dungeon, getting close to the next pack. But when you have Shadow Meld at your disposal, Shroud at your disposal, you're able to do so many different things that you otherwise wouldn't do.
Yep, and we're going to see Nerf stand there and tank everything for his team. He's going to drop incredibly low, but they're going to Shadow Meld everything up to be able to get healed up right before that second boss here.
Yeah, but I love to see the Fish Feast going down to be able to top himself off as the rest of the group gets into position, gets ready, tricks is up onto Nerf as they're getting ready to engage with Azeroth faster than Method EU.
And they don't really have too much available here in the way of cooldowns. They don't have their Army of the Deads available. They have the Frenzy available, but that's not, they just don't have that much available. I'm assuming they're planning on pulling this into the boss just for the Unholy DKs to get that extra cleave on top of the boss. And we're going to have to keep an eye on the Fixate RNG here. In an ideal scenario, you get all the Fixates on one person, but it looks like they got the worst possible scenario. They got 1 Fixate on 3 people, but fortunately for Lighty, he's got nothing. He's allowed to just freely AoE as much as possible here.
Oh, but they are getting the Earthquakes off. They didn't have an interrupt available, so they might be having somebody dropping low. JB is able to stabilize for the group on that one, but it's one of the things you really do not want to see, especially when any of the Earth Ragers are empowered by the boss.
And once again, on the second set of Fixates, Lighty didn't get targeted again. He's just getting lucky here.
Lad.
He's allowed to do a lot of damage, but somehow Shakib has had some massive RNG on this pull, just pulling ahead. Tons of AoE damage coming out from him. But they make that AoE trash pull look so easy. All they have to do is now passively cleave down Taskmaster, and they're good to go. Now, of course, they still have a little bit of trash percentage to deal with for the rest of the dungeon, but we've seen how teams like to deal with that. They usually will pull one of the robots on top of the third boss, Rix's Flux Flame, as well, and they'll get a little bit extra trash that way, maybe some bombs as well.
Yep, and then you're seeing right now Taskmaster Ascari still staying up on the side of Method NA as they are dealing with the last bits of Azeroth. It was also really impressive, as mentioned. Shakib was constantly getting fixated, and there's such a minimal amount of stacks that these guys are getting while they're able to continue dealing good damage. It's just a testament to the strength of the team and how well they're working together to benefit each other.
And problems for Method EU as 3 of their Earth Raiders just stood in Sanguine for a second there. That was not ideal. They're going to have to deal with those fixings for just a little bit longer. They each got about 20 or 30% of their health on top of that. That's not really ideal, but at the same time, you can just kite them out and AoE them down passively with the boss. So, you know, it could have been worse. They could have had the boss get healed by the Sanguine Ticks, but that didn't happen for them. But man, Method NA is playing lights out in this second portion of the dungeon.
I think that's the biggest takeaway onto this one is that 91% trash left available. They're killing the last couple Stone Furies, so they'll be around 93, 94% as they're going to be able to go into the third boss. We've seen a lot of times where those mechs are getting pulled in with the boss, and thankfully, they're not having to worry too much about any of the Azerite goop on the ground as it's now ticking as intended.
And of course, we're going to see another Shadow Meld skip here going to Rixa Fluxflame. They don't want to deal with any of the trash in the research and development wing because all of this has nasty mechanics that really most people just don't know what it does, me included. I don't really know what any of this does, so we're going to hope that they just completely skip it because it just does too much damage and it's too much to deal with. The knockbacks are nasty. So Shadow Melding that off, go into Rixa Fluxflame's platform, and we'll see what they're planning on doing for that last 7 of their trash percentage.
When we did see a couple teams playing in the research and development wing, it really reminded me a lot of that Hunter's Lodge in Waycrest Manor, just that little extra corner on the side there. It was one of those areas where, all right, you have a very specific amount of time in order to be able to kill all these mobs. If you don't, then you're dead. And it was just one of those things that you have to put all your cards in on the table in Waycrest Manor for Method EU strat. They say, we either do it or we don't. And in this way, in Motherlode, when you don't have to do any of those kind of trash pulls, when you're just a little bit more forgiving, if you don't have quite as much damage, you always want to be able to make those decisions.
And I mean, we have a very, very clear advantage for Method NA here. They're 20% ahead on the boss before Method EU is able to get their Shadow Meld skip off. So really, we're going to have to see some problems coming out for Method NA for Method EU to have any chance of coming back in this dungeon. I'm going dizzy with how many times I'm saying Method.
Hey, we can't count them out just yet on this one, all right? Method EU has found crazy ways to be able to pump out more single target damage than their opponents at the weirdest times possible. We still got to be able to deal with another 7% of trash, another 5% of trash for both teams on this one, and 2 more bosses at their disposal. I mean, we've seen a number of times where these teams are just making these incredible comebacks out of nowhere, and you got to keep in mind, they hate to lose, both of these guys. So when they see they've been beaten fair and square, no mistakes, no big errors of any kind on either opponent, they know they need to make those adjustments. So we can't count out Method EU just yet.
Look at that heads-up play there from JB. Oh, Nerf going down. They have a battle res
Yoda
available,
going down as well. Yoda going down as well. JB needs to be able to get that res, but he's constantly getting knocked back, and he almost dies himself. Nerf has regained control, 50% left on the boss, and that's what I'm talking about. Just having simple mistakes, simple deaths right there can be the end of it.
Method EU has caught up in boss percentage because of that. They're at the same percentage now, and you have those 2 deaths on the board for 10 extra seconds. This is exactly what we're talking about. Method EU needed to get back in the dungeon. It doesn't matter how clean you play in the first 90% of the dungeon. If you're going to make a small mistake at the end, that lets the other team back in.
Forget about a dead heat. Method EU is back in control right now. Dead even in terms of boss percentage, but that extra 10 seconds is incredibly significant. They're equal right now in trash percentage as well. Might even be able to pick some of that up from some of the mines along the way. We're getting really close onto this one as Mogul Razdunk, there we go, is going to be our final boss and will be our decider as to whether this is going to go into more games than 3.
I mean, this is going to be so close. They're both, I mean, if both of these teams are completely clean on the last boss, those 10 seconds are going to be the decider here for Method EU. These teams are just, that small mistake is going to cost them the match, if anything.
It might at that, and again, it's like a couple second difference. I mean, Method NA did end up killing the boss first, but those extra deaths are very scary. You are seeing some of those mines getting pulled. Likely that we're going to start seeing some of them getting killed and taken advantage of for that extra percentage. Method EU is doing the exact same thing as we speak. You're going to see them get that last bit of percentage from the mines, and then they're making a very big run. Lightfoot potions coming up for both the teams as they're getting ready to go to Mogul Razdunk's room and try to be able to pull out this victory.
It looks like this difference in strategy for the final couple of trash percentage has helped
Method EU's
NA out a lot.
killing it.
Method EU's killing the specialist instead of letting 4 bombs explode, and that has put Method NA back in the driver's seat here. They're going to be pulling the boss with the percentage they need way before Method EU. But
Shakib goes down, Lighty goes down! They were not able to pull off their Shadow Meld skips. JB needs to get another res right now and 10 more seconds of disadvantage. They need to pull the boss right now or they're in trouble.
the teams are going to be pulling the boss at almost the exact same time here with a 20-second advantage for Method EU. These guys are just giving it back and forth every single time they make a small mistake. The other team makes a small mistake, and this is going to be a neck-and-neck finish.
These healers need to be able to pump their very hearts out as we're getting started. Phase 1 right now for Mogul Razdunk. Couple percentage advantage on the side of Method NA, but a big 20-second disadvantage on their side as well.
Man,
strap yourselves in, friends. It's going to get close.
This is going to be close, and honestly, this intermission phase is going to be the make-or-break part of the fight. How efficiently these teams can deal with those ads, making sure they can get no misses on any of the stomps, because at this point,
NA just got a favorable the Gatling gun right now. They got it right as the boss hit 50% mark, allowing them to pump a little bit extra damage, but so did Method EU. They got the timings down to a T on this one. 41% for Method NA, 39 for Method EU when they hit that transition.
Man, and you can even see they have the racing flag down, prepared to let their tank intervene to it should he need to. They've got everything that they need to finish off this transition phase, but man, this is going to be so close. They entered the transition phase almost within 5 seconds of each other, and at this point, those deaths are more important than ever. Those 20 seconds on the board with how far close behind Method EU is, that's going to be the deciding factor here.
Really will, as they're getting those Sky Scorchers down. You even saw now standing in that pylon there, and standing in the stomp with cooldowns up, with Cocoon on him, making sure he was in the right spot when he needed to, and soaking up some of those shots that were going out onto the group from the Sky Scorchers. Very important to make sure that they are being soaked up by the tank and reducing the damage onto the group. Method NA's made their way out of that transition first, but Method EU's not far behind right now. 25% left on Mogul Razdunk for Method NA. When it goes down, stop the clock for them, and we're going to see how close Method EU will be to follow. At this point, Method EU is much quicker and is 14% left onto the boss. I don't think Method NA is going to be able to pull out this one, and Method EU will take the series 3-0 and will be our BlizzCon champions.
I don't think that there is a question in anybody's mind that this is the best team in the world. And every single glimpse that we have into the mindset of this team shows nothing but the mindset of champions. Jinxie gets a 2-0 early in the day, and he says he's not satisfied with the performance.